Chair, just to let you know, I've just gone live with the web.
Thank you for that. As far as I can see, we're just waiting for Councillor Mahaffey.
I think I've just got a cat joining me.
I'm sure it'll add to the meeting.
Oh, very sweet.
I know I am.
Well, I make it 6:30, and have we got somebody else joining? Right, so it's gone 6:30, so I shall start the meeting, and I've got to read this out to everybody first. I am Councillor Nick Robinson, the Chair of the Manydown Overview Committee, and I would like to welcome everyone to the meeting, which is being held virtually and in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings, which reflect the recently published government regulations. This meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be available to view after the meeting has finished. Councillors who sit on this committee are identified by name on the screen, and I will introduce officers by name before they address the committee. Councillors are reminded that although this meeting is being held remotely, they are regarded as being present at a meeting of the Council and should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Member Code of Conduct and not allow members of their household to distract them during the course of the meeting. Can members ensure that mobile phones are now switched off or on silent? Members of the committee will turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they've been invited to speak by myself as the chair. Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote on the item under discussion. Members can indicate they wish to speak by raising their hand and should only speak when I, as chair, invite them to do so. The officers present will only switch on their video link during the item that they are presenting or when they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. As chair, I will confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time on the agenda and will address the committee by audio link. Councillors should declare they are leaving the meeting and switch off their video link if they have a disclosable pecuniary interest or other personal interest on the item on the agenda. Councillors can switch on their video link when I call voting to be taken by roll call, and I will confirm the recommendation proposed by the committee before voting begins. Can each member indicate whether they are for or against the recommendation or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully we will not have any IT problems, but can I remind councillors that if their connection is lost in any way, they should immediately advise Democratic Support Officer and use a meeting link to access the meeting again. If you could, everybody be aware, I can't actually see all of you at any one time, so I will be flicking backwards and forwards between the screens. So if I miss you as a speaker, please switch your mic on and let me know as soon as you can. I don't want to miss anybody. I want everybody to have a fair chance to speak. Everybody happy with that? I'll take that as a yes. Apologies for absence and substitutions. I have been told that Councillor Freeman will be substituting for Councillor Cooper. Are there any other apologies for absence or substitutions? Take that as a no. Are there any declarations of interest? No, good. Urgent matters. As far as I'm aware, there are none. Has anybody else got any urgent matters? No, good. Right. Meeting of the minutes held on the 29th of July. I move the minutes. The minutes are a true record, and I will sign them whenever I get a chance. Is everybody happy with that? Yeah, everybody seems happy. Right. Item 5, Manydown Programme Update Report, and I believe Councillor Isaac is starting on that first. Thank you, John.
Good evening, Chairman, and good evening, councillors. Yep, I will kick things off on the programme update report for Manydown. So we are entering a new and important phase in the realisation of the 3,500 new homes at Manydown. Urban and Civic are now appointed and will be taking the lead role as development managers from the joint officer team, who will continue in a supporting role and ensure that the interests of the two councils and our residents are continue to be protected as 50-50 joint development partner with Urban and Civic. Above that structure sits the Manydown Garden Communities LLP, on which councillors from the two councils are represented, and we are the guardians of the project and the interests of the borough, and will ensure that we keep a close eye on how DevCo, or it's got a new name now, which we'll come on to in a minute, how DevCo operates with Urban and Civic and the officer team. So there's a packed agenda tonight covering important topics. I know topics that are important to this overview committee, and those include how our thinking is evolving in relation to the Manydown standard, affordable housing and the country park. Also, we're going to bring councillors up to date on the planning and delivery programme. Key thing is obviously we must build those houses on Manydown. And you'll get also tonight reports from our officer team on the progress on Manydown South. The report also covers capital and revenue budgets and updates for both Manydown North and Manydown South. And finally, because it's been a topic that's been raised on a number of occasions, that's important to the people who are going to live in Manydown, and also to residents nearby and schools in those neighbourhoods. We have a senior officer representative from Hampshire County Council tonight, who's going to give you an update on how the county, as the education body, is planning in relation to Manydown, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions for that officer. So in relation to Manydown North, the report examines where we are on section 106. I'm keen, as the portfolio holder, that this work is completed as early as possible in conjunction with the local planning authority. And the development manager from Urban and Civic is now taking the lead on those discussions with the LPA. He's also leading on the planning strategy to obtain detailed planning with reserved matters approval as soon as possible. On the country park, we all, I think, appreciate that this is going to be a huge asset, not just for the people who will be living on at Manydown, but also the neighbouring wards and indeed the whole borough. So we'll be getting an update on thinking in relation to the country park. I've referred earlier to the DevCo board, which is now called the Manydown Development Vehicle, or MDV, very snappy title, MDV LLP. They've now met, and so they're up and running. And that's a 50-50 joint representation between the two councils and Urban and Civic. That is the delivery board, if you like. Again, the development manager will tell us tonight about the programme and budget as part of the interim business plan, which has now been adopted by MDV. I should mention his name, of course. It's Richard Coppell, who's the development manager from Urban and Civic. Another subject that's dear to our hearts is affordable housing. And Manydown will offer the opportunity to look at having at housing affordability in new and innovative ways. The council has commissioned Campbell Tickle and ARC4 to bring proposals for you to examine tonight. So we're getting a presentation from them. Turning to the Manydown Standard, this evening there'll be a presentation on how our thinking is progressing in relation to the Manydown Standard. It's important that that Manydown responds to the two councils' climate emergency declarations, and that we seize the opportunities to build energy efficient, well-designed and built new homes, making the most of exciting, evolving technologies to save and conserve scarce resources. It'll be interesting to hear your views tonight. Now, switching to Manydown South, workers continue to ensure proper infrastructure planning and strategy for inclusion of Manydown South in the local plan update. That's our ambition. Technical studies are being undertaken and so that we can make representations to the issues and options stage of the local plan update, which needs to be in by the 9th of November. Our proposals are being finalised on such issues as place, movement, zero carbon, natural assets, health and well-being, biodiversity, and delivering construction. The project director, Andrew Reynolds, will give you more information on that tonight. We've talked previously about learning the lessons of Manydown North so far, and the previously highlighted that it's important that we benefit from those, not only in terms of where we head in relation to Manydown North, but also obviously in relation to Manydown South. And the proposal is that we will there will be a report and presentation to you in December on that. Then the report also looks at the financial situation. A summary of the Manydown programme costs are provided for both North and South, and there's also details, opportunities for the two councils under the development agreement with Urban and Civic to invest £1.43 million in the MDV LLP to provide work in progress finance, giving an interest to the two councils of 9.5%. plus 6 months LIBOR, and also the opportunity to provide loan finance to finance the Manydown Garden Communities LLP operation to the tune of just under £1 million. And again, the interest is very attractive, 5% plus 6 months LIBOR. Finally, the report also refers to engagement and consultation. A strategy is being put together between the two councils and the development partner, setting out roles and responsibilities in line with previously agreed protocols. And it's important that the development partner, now in the lead position, starts to actively communicate with residents, stakeholders and ward councillors, and that is being put in train as we speak. So, Chairman, that's sort of my quick run through of the report, and I look forward to the presentations and the questions you're going to have throughout the evening.
Thank you very much, John. We will come back to you later. Right. Next item on the agenda is we have a visiting speaker, and Mr. Lee. Can somebody arrange for Mr. Lee to be visible or heard?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lee. I hear you loud and clear. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to talk about a few areas of the report today. Firstly, I was slightly confused between section 316 on page 5 of the report and the next section. The first suggests a flexible approach to the section 106, particularly around transportation, yet section 317 suggests that the key focus of the DevCo manager will be to finalise the transport mitigation package. Is there a difference between the two? Whilst I understand the reasoning behind being flexible in certain areas, there are others where flexibility now will cause more costs and issues for residents in the future. It'll be much harder to get people to take up greener methods of transport around the area if they aren't implemented from the beginning. Second is about phasing again, and particularly 2 areas, schools and site development access. On schooling, I would refer committee members back to the meeting in October 2019, where the Chair of Governors of the Federation of Winklebury Infant and Junior Schools said that if a primary school is built as part of phase 1, there is a real risk that they would face closure. The opening of the school in Rooksdown caused redundancies at their school, and in times like now, the greatest of effort should be placed on securing jobs rather than adding more to the growing unemployment figures. On junctions and site access, I want to urge the team to reconsider the order the site is opened up. This year, there have been 2 serious crashes at the Winklebury Way and Roman Road junction, the last one a little over a week ago that caused the road to be closed. With both site and residential traffic expected to travel down this road, it won't be long until those serious crashes become fatal. Additionally, with recent minor roadworks at the roundabout junction of Roman Way and the B3400, the traffic backed up all the way past the Winklebury Way junction. Opening up the site in the north will cause the least disruption to residents and possibly prevent accidents. Lastly, I was pleased to see that the team will take on a lessons learned exercise, and hopefully they'll reach out to residents of Winklebury who, from what I have been hearing, haven't been impressed so far. I quote one resident who said, "Our views don't matter. They do what they want regardless. There is no point in trying to have input anymore." Or another who said they had to listen, they had to say that we would be consulted, but it didn't mean that they had to be listened. In my line of work, retrospectives happen frequently, but we also take the learnings and adapt our process, and I hope that this will happen here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and you are absolutely spot on time as well. John or Andrew, would you like to respond to that?
I'll start, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Lee, for attending again. I think that it's best left to the senior officer from Hampshire County Council to respond to your concerns about primary schools. And I'm going to suggest that the project director, Andrew Reynolds, actually deals with the questions on section 106 and on transport mitigation, and also on site access. So we can turn to Andrew, gives him time to prepare his thoughts. Then on lessons learned, yes, it is very important that we, that having been involved in this process for as long as we have been, that we do take away the positives and the negatives, and so I'm sure that will be a beneficial exercise, and that you as ward councillors or borough councillors will be able to lend your experience of the process and draw on your experience as active members of the community. I'm disappointed. Look, in terms of Winklebury residents, I'm disappointed, but not overly surprised that we can't please all the people all the time. But I think that huge efforts in many ways have been taken with this project to listen to points of view, and we have there have been a number of examples of where we have changed our plans we can't please everyone, but I think we've gone a long way, and we benefited in terms of how we have come up with the proposals so far, and there are going to be further opportunities. We've got outline planning permission at this stage, but there'll be further opportunities for residents. And sure, yeah, we will make a point of talking further to residents in Winklebury.
Thank you, John. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So just referring to the report that is before you, the question with regard to transport is just to qualify what we are advising in the report. There are two elements, whilst they are linked, they are two separate elements. The first is that the outline planning application report that was considered by Development Control Committee set out the approach to transport and how we would deliver the mitigation package with Hampshire County Council. That looks at given the timing of the development and over the timescale which we need to deliver it, is significant, and therefore we would not be fixing, we've not proposed to fix, nor has Hampshire County Council wanted us to fix, all the mitigation package works for Manydown. Therefore, there is a flexible, or what we call monitor and manage approach to a number of the off-site proposals that were put forward in the outline application, so that as we progress through the development, further transport assessments will be undertaken, and either the work that we've identified in the original application undertaken, or if there has been a change, then there is a conversation and an agreement with the local planning authority and Hampshire County Council as to what that change might be. So it has to be a flexible approach, but we have, again, within the report that was set out to DC committee, there was a cap figure in there in terms of cost of just over £25 million worth of funding that will go into transport infrastructure. So that is a significant contribution that the Manydown project will make towards transport. The second paragraph, which is 3.1.7, just highlights that Urban and Civic and the councils will be working together to finalise the Section 106 agreement, in particular the transport element of that, and therefore all it does is highlight that work continuing between officers of the council and Urban and Civic, the local planning authority and the highway authority. Just in terms of response to site access, this is a point that was made at DC committee. We're aware that Urban and Civic, we've raised this with them, and obviously as part of the works, as we now look at how we will open up the site, that is very much part and parcel of the consideration that is being looked at. We don't have a response to that at the moment, but clearly as and when that evolves, we will bring that back to MOC as an update. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I lost my microphone. Thank you for your responses. Next speaker we have is Abigail Compton Burnett. Are you there, Abigail? Hello, Abigail.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hear you loud and clear. Abigail, thank you for coming. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. The COVID pandemic has led to profound changes in the way that people live and work. My question to you is, how is the Manydown project team identifying those changes and modifying the plans that were conceived several years ago to reflect those changes? Here are some examples of changes that should be considered. Many office workers are working from home. Those workers will need purpose-built office spaces in their homes. Younger workers will need different, cheaper housing models, such as co-living and cluster flats, so they can work in a small flat all day and use communal areas for socialising. There will also be a need for serviced offices with different sized meeting rooms on Manydown. Housing for older people. Almost 20% of people in Basingstoke are aged over 65. Post-pandemic, many more will choose retirement complexes rather than residential care homes. Shops. Over 25% of shoppers say that their shopping habits have changed permanently as a result of the pandemic. Online supermarket shopping has doubled since March, with people buying weekly non-perishable goods online and then going to local shops such as bakers, butchers, grocers and post offices during the week. Home working has also led to a greater demand for local food outlets, such as coffee shops, bakeries and cafes, which provide food during the day. Sports and leisure facilities. The shift to home working means that there will be far more demand for sports facilities for 18 to 65-year-olds, as workers spend more time in their communities rather than on the train or in the city. Increasingly, people will socialise in their communities rather than town centres or near workplaces. Cafes, bars, restaurants and community facilities need to be designed for activities that will bring local people of all ages together. I recognise that many of these changes are in line with the principles of Garden Towns, which informed Manydown's original plans. I would urge you to revisit those plans in the light of the profound changes to the ways in which we live and work, to ensure that the Manydown development is designed to best meet the needs of its residents, both now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, would you like to kick off a response?
Yes, Chairman, I would. Thank you, Abigail. You raised some important issues. I think it's perhaps too early to say what the long-term impact of COVID will be, but it's looking as though it's going to accelerate a lot of changes that were already in place. And I'm glad that you referred to the sort of heritage of Manydown as being in accordance with the sort of garden town principles of places like Welwyn Garden City and so forth, because that's been a very key part of the foundation of our thinking on this, and it's about sort of self-sufficient communities, walkable neighbourhoods. So in many ways, I feel that if many of these changes do adhere in the future, then Manydown will be even more attractive place to want to live and work, because a lot of this, the workplaces, the retailing, the sporting facilities and so forth will be on the doorstep. So there won't be the need to jump in the car and go miles to get these amenities. And the other I think positive about the way we're going about things is that we've got outline planning permission. So there is time for us to take on board some of these profound changes that are affecting the way that people are going to be living in the future, so that we can make sure we get this right. I think it's a very well made point, very exciting for us, but we do actually have to be alert to all these changes and make sure that we can take the benefit of change, because change, as we know, can bring downsides, but also lots of benefits.
Thank you, John. Andrew, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Isaac put that very well. I think it's a very good point that Abigail makes in terms of the issues that we face, and I think they are live. Many of the points that she's raised are live conversations that we are having amongst the team and indeed with Urban and Civic. And she's absolutely right. There is a change that is happening with more people working from home. That is likely to continue in various different forms, but also on Manydown we may have the opportunity to rethink how we use community centres for small business areas and meeting spaces. And as we've already set out, Manydown is designed on Garden Town principles, very much our walking and cycling neighbourhoods. The green spaces, the country park are all really important elements where people can enjoy lunch breaks who live on Manydown. So we've got some really key elements that are already in place, and clearly for us we will build on those, but ultimately there is still change that we need to reflect as we understand how the pandemic will affect future living, and really just assure members and both Abigail that this is work that's very much at the heart of what the Manydown project team are doing, and will continue when we with Urban and Civic as part of the work that they will undertake in designing Manydown. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, our next presentation is from the Education Authority, and we have Glenn Parkinson and Peter Colnut to speak.
Good evening, Chairman. If I could start, it's Peter Colnut here. Can I just check actually, because my colleague Glenn Parkinson's been having one or two internet problems. Glenn, can you hear us and are you able to speak?
I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can, fine. So we'll hand over during the presentation as we'd originally planned. Chairman, would it be helpful if I answered Mr. Lee's question about the initially about the school and the opening of it and the impact on Winklebury?
Certainly, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Lee raised the point about phase one of the development and the potential impact on Winklebury Primary School. We're working incredibly closely with the Basingstoke planning team and Urban and Civic, as we do on all major development areas, to try and ensure that the new school provision that we establish doesn't have a negative impact on surrounding schools. None of us want that. We all need the existing school places we've got, and the last thing we need is people going from existing developments into the new, because then we won't have the school places available for the families that become established in the new housing development. And the way that we manage that is to work carefully to understand the timing, the phasing of the new housing. And we seek to open a new school at a time when we've got around sort of 20 to 30 year-R children in the development. And we can manage that through the admissions process of only offering 30-year-R places. Okay. So if we could move on to the presentation, Jess, if you could just on to the next slide. Thank you. So I'm Peter Colnut, Assistant Director for Children's Services. My primary responsibility is for school place planning and the management of the Children's Services and Adults Capital Programme. So to start for this evening, thank you for your time. I'd just like to take you through the key areas. We'll talk about the context around the capital programme and school place planning. Glenn will then take us through the specifics related to Manydown and the impact on primary and secondary. We'd then welcome a bit of a conversation with you, if appropriate, about the wider impact of SIL on education infrastructure, and then questions at the end. So we've just got 12 slides to take you through. I'll do the first 6 and then Glenn will take over. So next slide, please. So the County Council, as you're probably aware, has a statutory responsibility for the planning of school places, and that's irrespective of governance. So we work with academies, free schools and mainstream schools in terms of trying to locate local schools for local children. And the national funding policy, in terms of the government grant that's made available to support that, currently comes in the form of basic need, which is simply new school places, and capital maintenance, which is fixing roofs and windows. And the basic need element of the government grant that we receive focuses on where there's new births, and that's increasing births from existing housing developments. The DfE expect where there's new school places to be built to serve new housing, that cost is paid for by the developer. So we've been embarked over the last sort of 10 years actually on a fairly significant investment programme, probably the most significant for the last 30 years. And to put that in context, 2013 to 2022, so projects on site and live and some already opened and delivered, will provide over 19,000 additional places across Hampshire. And we produce each year a school places plan in January, which gives us sort of like 4 or 5 year window of understanding of what we believe will be the impact on schools across the county. And as you're also probably aware, all new schools that become established now will become a free school stroke academy. That's whether it's mainstream schools or even SEND schools. And there's two routes to securing a new school. One is the direct application route, which is where a independent setting or a trust could apply to the DFE to set a new school. The DFE make a certain allocation each year for the number of free school direct applications that will be available. There's no guarantee that your school will be approved. And with the current pressures on the spending review, we're unsure as we stand at the moment as to whether there or when the next round of direct application free schools will become available. So the other route, which is the route that the DFE expect local authorities to embark upon for developments such as Manydown, is the presumption route. And that's a route where we advertise the school and any trusts across the country can apply to run that school. They make an application, we assess that application, and then we submit that to the Secretary of State to make the final decision. So next slide, please, Jess. So in terms of the pressures on the programme, again, a bit of context, we've got a balanced position between income and expenditure, but we are seeing now an ongoing pressure across primary and secondary across the county, which drives to a deficit in resources over the 5-year programme. And some of that pressure is now coming about due to inflation in the construction industry and some of the uncertainties and challenges about Brexit and also arising from COVID. So the UK construction industry is performing well, but it is experiencing a drop in confidence. And that's having an impact in terms of future orders and returns. And one thing we do know from working through the with the industry is that tender prices are influenced by risk. And there is perceived to be a fair amount of risk at the moment, and therefore we are expecting to see some increase in costs in some places. In terms of the size of the programme, so it's a significant programme. Our 3-year programme is around about 200 million in terms of the investment. So obviously any increases in inflation across that have quite a significant impact. So in terms of the final point there, which is a discussion maybe for a wider chat at some stage, is about the impact of SIL and the implications currently that we can only use SIL in, we can only use section 106 in Basingstoke for new school provision. When we come to look at expansions and extensions of schools, we are reliant on SIL, which arguably may not offer the contributions that are required to deliver those suitable school places. So on to my final slide now before I pass over to Glenn. So I wanted to just sort of talk about the drive that we've been on to deliver better value schools. And part of the conversation about the design solutions for Manydown, we've been working closely with Urban and Civic and with your planners to understand the specific design codes, the master planning, and the community outcomes to ensure that that school that we provide meets with those design standards, those aspirations, that we also provide a facility that's located appropriately through the master plan process in terms of walking routes and access to schools. And I undertake a national role working alongside the DFE outside Can you still hear me, Chairman? Chairman, can you still hear me? Hello?
I think we can hear you, Peter, yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, the screen blocked out then. So undertaking a national role, one of the things that I have the benefit and experience of is looking at buildings across the country. And I'm confident to say that the property services team, of which I'm not part of, do deliver some of the highest quality buildings that I've seen delivered across the country. So the final message there, I think, is to say that the design solutions that we'll come up with very much will be in keeping with your aspirations for Manydown, working closely with Urban and Civic and the Planning Authority, and that I'm confident that we can produce a design solution that works to meet those aspirations in a value for money way. Glenn, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. Apologies, I can't show my face on this one. What I just wanted to go through is, sorry? Okay. What I just wanted to do is establish the key principles with our school place planning strategies, and we then go on to look at how that equates to Manydown. So the key principles are highlighted there. So we obviously will look towards schools being located for the local children, obviously to promote community cohesion, opportunities for active travel. Schools need to be of a size that ensures that we can be sustainable and cost effective. So we are looking mostly for schools, in new schools, to be at least 2 forms of entry, or to be expandable to at least 2 forms of entry, and a maximum size is 3 forms of entry, which equates to 90 children per year group. A form of entry equates to 30 children. And obviously, from the point of view, we want to ensure good local schools with the highest expectations for children's success, and where parents can be confident that their children will be safe. And we work very closely with new providers of schools, academy sponsors, to ensure that those principles are established when we are choosing sponsors and opening new schools. And we continue to have a statutory duty to ensure the sufficiency of school places for Hampshire children, even though we now have a situation where academies and academy sponsors are those people who actually provide and run those schools. Next slide, please. So in terms of Manydown provision, we've got the number of dwellings, and we equate a pupil yield of 0.3 of a child per qualifying dwelling of 2 beds or more. And in the case of Manydown, that's 5 forms of entry. So what that will be is the plans are to have 2 primary schools, one to the eastern part of the site and one to the western site, with them being 630 places and 420 places. The eastern site is likely to be the 3FE school, but we are very unlikely to open that as 3FE initially. Pete's already explained that we need to ensure that the timing for those schools and ensuring that we have a quantum of pupils to open the school, but we don't provide places. We don't want to provide too many places too early in order to protect and preserve the opportunities for local children from Manydown to secure those places. In terms of the work that's still ongoing with Section 106 is we have an estimate for the Eastern School to be the first opening in 2025. That's based on house build-out rates, and it equates to the fact that that's approximately 20 year-old children, and we would then gradually grow the school when the quantum of children are turning up from the development to open up additional classes in year R. And we would then need to consider the timing for the second school and whether that school happens prior to the potential expansion of the Eastern School. And my understanding that current plans are that development will take place in the eastern and western part. So we just need to understand as we go forward when that second school needs to be triggered and when the trigger is for the expansion to the first school. Next slide, please. So in terms of secondary, we continue the 5 forms of entry. That's 700 places, matching obviously the primary provision. But we do feel that a school of 5 forms of entry, 750 places, is on the small side for a new secondary school. in order to preserve our options for strategically thinking of school place planning, we reserved or secured a site for up to 12 forms of entry to take account of any further housing plans that may exist in Basingstoke and relates to the revision of the local plan. And I think that's a key point going forward in terms of our planning, is that we need to understand the housing, the new housing that may well be proposed, where it is, timings, etc., to be able to secure and agree a strategy for how we provide places going forward. Schools are funded predominantly on the number of children that exist within them, and funding follows those children. So there are significant challenges in ensuring that a secondary school in particular provides enough funding when it opens to enable you to deliver the curriculum that you need to do for the secondary sector. So there's some real challenges around how we do that and when we are able to do that to ensure that funding exists. We need to also consider the places across the town in planning for any new school or Manydown. And as I say, we need to ensure that we get as early as possible identification of any new housing and what the implications are for our planning, both at primary and at secondary level, and obviously the impact for Manydown in terms of school provision at secondary. Next slide, please. So we're working closely with officers of the council on the local plan review, talking about the potential sites that may come forward and the implications for school places. And we continue to do that. Obviously, we are aware that there's likely to be a significant level of housing, but that housing numbers and where it's going to be located has yet to be confirmed. And I appreciate there is a long process to go through in terms of the review of the local plan. And we need to understand what the implications are for school place planning, not also within the town, but also across the borough in other areas. Next, please. And in terms of SIL, it's similar conversations that we're having with officers, as Pete alluded to, in terms of, excuse me, the current policy and the impact that could have going forward if we see housing at a level which would mean expansion of schools, not new schools. And unless you are looking to potentially build a significant level of housing in one location, which would warrant brand new schools, a la we're seeing at Manydown, then the position will be that we are likely to see expansions of schools, and we have done that in many occasions across the borough and specifically in the town. So the SIL policy, as Pete says, needs to be enabling us to get some funding from developers to where we have to, and it's necessary to do so, provide those additional places and expansions of existing schools. Next slide, which I think is questions. It is.
You're quite right, councillors. Questions. If you could limit your questions to what is pertinent to Manydown. This is not a general discussion about education in Basingstoke or Hampshire, so it's got to be about Manydown. So who wants to kick it off? Yes, Councillor Freeman.
Okay, well, this is certainly something that definitely interests me as far as schools go. First of all, local schools for local children. What does that mean in terms of distance? How local is local, and why wasn't this policy adhered to with regards to Fort Hill? And secondly, you seem to be assuming that these houses are all going to be populated by young families. What about blended families? So where you have like 2 adults with several children, teenagers, that the likelihood that they'll be moving in there is quite sort of, you know, realistic. And we need to be thinking about whether we can provide secondary. At the moment, we already have 4 good primary schools in the vicinity, which you don't seem to be taking into consideration. If you build another primary school too soon on Manydown, and Winklebury Federation schools will face the risk of closure. I think you need to be very careful when you're planning your policy with regards to education and new schools, that you are not disadvantaging existing schools. As I said, we have 4 good primary schools in this vicinity. We don't need another primary school. What we do need is a secondary school within reasonable walking distance of the houses on both Manydown and Winklebury, which currently we don't have. Thank you.
Gentlemen, who would like to answer that one?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to respond. Thank you, Councillor Freeman. First and foremost, the point you make is absolutely valid. We will always strive to ensure that the impact on surrounding schools is kept to an absolute minimum. But there is no doubt that a development of this size and nature actually absolutely warrants new school provision. And coming back to the point that you made, and I absolutely agree with, local schools for local children, that's why we're proposing new schools to serve the Manydown development. In terms of the distances of travel, ideally, we try to have a distance factor of about 800 metres of the catchment area. That doesn't always work, clearly, but where possible, that's something we'll strive to achieve. And that's what actually comes into the master planning and working with Urban and Civic and the local planning authority in terms of identifying the appropriate locations for the new schools, not only just in terms of their walking routes, but also in terms of their adjacency to other community needs. The question about Fort Hill, I'm not sure if it's really for now, but that's a long debate and public consultation. Basically, Fort Hill School closed because the local community did not use the school. There were 40 children of an intake when that school shut, and there have been previous numbers to that level. I was involved in that discussion, complicated and challenging process, but it was because the local community were not choosing to send children to the school. It was not viable anymore. I absolutely agree with you about the other surrounding schools, absolutely good schools, and everything that we're proposing on Manydown is only to serve the Manydown development and not to take children away from the existing community. And the secondary school proposal for Manydown, that's why we've got a site reserved there. At the moment, the number of dwellings being built at North Manydown, some 3,500, as Glenn has said, do not make a secondary school viable. So we need to understand more by working with Basingstoke officers and through the local plan review what other housing's coming forward and where any new secondary provision is best located. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? I can't see any hands up at the Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Chair. I raised my electronic hand. I thought that might work better.
I can't see your electronic hand.
Oh, that's terrible. It's very nice.
You have to make do with the flesh one.
Okay. But first of all, I should probably declare an interest. I am a county councillor as well, sit on the Children and Young Services Committee and also sit on the Education Advisory Panel at Hampshire County Council. So I just make that clear. It's all registered already, but just for clarification. First of all, I want to say that the presentation, whilst very interesting, had the most frightening thing I've ever seen in a presentation about schools. Best value for money. That should never, ever, ever be the priority. Best outcome for children, that would be great. That's where we're at with education. It should never be about best value for money. We're not running a budget poundland education system in Hampshire. I really hope we're not. So I'd like to know where that expression come from and why it's incorporated in that best value for money. It's a strange thing about education. Other than that, I kind of get the whole critical mass, particularly secondary school. We know that if you've got less than 8 form entry schools, it's really difficult to really offer a broad spectrum of subjects. So I kind of understand where we're coming from on that one. I'm pleased we've reserved the site for a secondary school, but I also totally accept there's no point having a school with no children. They're absolutely critical children. So in terms of the school, what I'm really concerned about, and I think the point was raised pretty well by Councillor Freeman, is the risk of this sort of strange idea we've got competition with schools rather than complementary with schools, and that Manydown schools could possibly offer things that the existing primary schools couldn't. They could work together rather than work against each other. I'd like to understand from the officers how we can get round this ridiculous idea that everything has to be an academy. If you're a good school, you become academy. If you're a terrible school, you become academy. If you're a new school, you become an academy. How do we get round that to make sure that the schools in Manydown, and particularly when we get to secondary schools and primary schools, that they work together rather than work in competition? How do we get round that?
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Would you like me to respond? Thank you. Councillor James, good points. I think in actual fact, in the presentation, I talk about better value, not best value in terms of the school. And what we're trying to just explain there is that the school building solutions that we're designing now are better value buildings. But I did absolutely emphasise, and thank you for you saying it, because it's absolutely clear in anything in any of the design client briefs that we provide that it has an absolute assurance that we're delivering quality learning spaces. That will always be the driver. But there actually is a way, and we actually are delivering better value schools now than we were 10 years ago. We're delivering higher performing buildings. We're delivering a better learning environment. So those are the key drivers in terms of what we're pushing for. But in terms of the academy and the trust side of things, that's completely out of our hands, I'm afraid. That's a government legislation that stipulates that all new schools must be an academy, free school. We have no ability to change that. The DfE are absolutely clear, and government legislation is absolutely clear that irrespective of what any individual local authority may think or any member may think, all new schools have to be academies or free schools.
Just a
Thank you for the
supplementary,
answer.
Chair.
Certainly.
In relation to that, would it be beyond the law for the borough to decide that it wanted to create an academy trust, a multi-academy trust, and start running its own schools so they could work in partnership rather than competition?
Thank you for raising that. I mean, one of the points I should have actually said is that any new academy trusts that are established, whether they be new or whether they be existing to run schools, will come through us in the first place as the local education authority to understand their ethos, their vision for education, and what they're striving to offer. Where we've got a development such as Manydown, ideally you would seek to have a group of schools under one trust that would come under one trust, so you would get that cohesive group. So could you set up yourselves as Basingstoke to set yourself up as an academy trust? Yes, you could. Could you apply to run the schools? Yes, you could. And you would be considered then against obviously any of the other trusts that were coming forward or submitted a bid to think about taking on the schools.
Thank you for those answers. Councillor Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question is a follow-on from the two previous questions from Councillor Freeman and Councillor James. Is that, as you pointed out, there is need for a critical mass for any school to be successful. And unfortunately, although I agree with Councillor James and Councillor Freeman that the idea of competition is not particularly pleasant, but the reality is anybody that has had to make the decision about where you're going to send your children, it's an agonising decision, and you do trade one off against the other. Ergo, there is always going to be some degree of competition. So my question is, in the early days, this is going to be a brand new, shiny, lovely building. We're going to get some top quality teachers in there, no doubts, but there is still a sales job to be done to both the local community and the wider community for people to use it. Now, until we've got some sort of history there, educational history, where we've got Ofsted reports that we can report to, that you can look at league tables and things like that, what are the actual metrics that we're going to use to say this is a success or not?
Thank you, Chairman. So any of the trust that comes forward will be identified, say, a year before the opening of the school, and during that process, they do their marketing campaign. And if they're an established trust, they will talk to their previous experience and their track record of educational performance and standards and delivery. If they were to be a new trust that was formed, then they would have to set out and share their offer in terms of their vision that they were proposing and taking forward. But that vision, if it was a brand new trust that was being established, would be something that we would look really, really carefully at as an educational authority to ensure that we had the confidence that they were going to be a suitable and appropriate educational provider. So of the new schools that we're opening currently, they're established trusts. They're established trusts within Hampshire. So they have a track record of performance and delivery. And the consultation events that we've been to, the trusts have come along and they've offered their performance targets and achievements that they've made through their existing schools. And they'll often use an experienced and existing head teacher leader to front up the new school proposals.
So can I have a quick supplemental on that, Chair?
Certainly.
So the question therefore, and I think you may have already answered this, the question is, how do we control that to our satisfaction, not just as an LEA, but as a borough council and an overview committee of the of Manydown? Presumably it just comes down to, we like you as a trust and we don't like you as a trust.
It absolutely comes down to their educational vision and what they can back that up with and what they can show and prove to educational advisors that they're an appropriate body to take on and run the new school. So anyone who applies to become a sponsor, that's the sort of discussion obviously that we can have with yourselves, but the recommendation will go from the educational advisors within the local authority to the Secretary of State. And we will make a recommendation as to who we think the trust should be, but the final decision rests with the Secretary of State. And that's part of the legislative framework that we work to now in terms of new schools.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Councillor David Leakes.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know, I've not read anywhere I can see. Are all new schools accessible for all types of disabilities?
Thank you, Chairman. So all schools are accessible to meet DDA regs. Some schools have specific resourced facilities to cater for specific SEND needs. And as we move forward and we understand the timing of the new school and we do an assessment of what's needed in the local area in terms of special school provision, we would seek to identify whether there was a requirement for any type of specialist SEND resource provision. But clearly the building will meet full DDA regs.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Councillor Freeman.
Just a couple more. When we were talking about the forms of entry, if you take into consideration the current schools in the local area, how many forms of entry does that then take it to? And secondly, how far is the current provision for children to schools in Basingstoke from the furthest point in the ward to that school?
Okay, in terms of the development, we're talking only about the new schools serving children within the Manydown development. So we're not looking at outside of the development. Was that your question? How far it is from existing catchment areas?
I was thinking more secondary schools rather than.
Well, so as we.
How close is local? How close are you considering local?
Well, at the moment, there's a secondary school site proposed within Manydown, which sits within the heart of the northern development area.
And okay, here's another question. What happens if you find there are more secondary school age children living in the development than there are primary? will you then sort of bring forward the plans for a secondary school and hold back on plans for primary school?
We'll continue to monitor and understand what the pupil yield is from the housing development. This is something we do across all developments. And I can take you, if I take you just down the road to Winchester, we had a new primary school at Barton Farm proposed, and we actually slipped that on 3 occasions because the housing numbers were not being delivered by the house builder and the pupil yield was much lower than we anticipated. So we have that flexibility to defer the opening of a school. Your point about secondary, clearly if we started to see secondary children coming off the development sooner, then we would have to react and respond to that at that point in time as we understood it. What is actually happening across all other developments that we're working on, we're finding that the secondary pupils are coming through much later. They're coming through after the children have been through primary school, and parents that are moving into the development with secondary age children are tending to leave their children in their existing schools for fear of disrupting their education.
Okay, so if you have if the current local schools have still spaces, you won't consider building primary school?
No, what we will do is we would not expect children from Manydown. If we get to, we talked about a mass of around about 20 to 30 year R children. And on the basis that Manydown is yielding that sort of number of children, we will seek to open the school to provide a school place for those children. So it's local schools for local children. What we don't want...
But they're already local schools, and if they're not full, what's the point in building a new school? Because when you said yourself that schools are dependent on funding. So if you are encouraging children from Manydown to attend the existing local schools, that will provide them with extra funding and it will do better for them, especially places like Winklebury Federation, who they have said they are concerned that if they lose children to Manydown, or if they don't get an influx from Manydown, like they should do, like they need to, then they will be forced to close. And I don't think that's fair. You should be making sure that the children from Manydown, it's close enough to get to. Like I said, there are 4 very good local schools. We don't need any extra provision until all places at those schools are filled.
You're absolutely right. They are for good schools, and for the record, we're not proposing to close any schools within the foreseeable in terms of any of the forecast numbers that we're looking forward at. So, but what we do need to do is to ensure that we provide schools in the right place. Manydown is of a size to necessitate its own primary school provision. And for that purpose, we will seek to provide new primary schools to serve that new community. What you don't want to find is that you end up with a number of children having to disappear off the Manydown development, and then other children having a school place on Manydown. We'll get a challenge then as to why we didn't provide the appropriate school provision to serve the Manydown development.
Thank you very much for the answers. Do we have questions from anybody else? In that case, thank you very much to our speakers, Glenn Parkinson and Pete Colnut. Yeah, thank you very much, gentlemen. Before we move on to...
Good evening.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Before we move on to our next speakers, I've made a few notes. I think probably the key thing that Councillor Freeman has raised is that we need constant monitoring of the demand over the Winklebury Manydown area for the schools. A lot of the questions I think have been answered. We're looking at 750 places in a secondary school. We're looking at a 2 to 3 form entry primary school. We're looking at 30 year R places before the first primary school is opened. And we're looking at some budgetary restrictions that are coming in through inflation, through Brexit, through COVID, and through the change from 106 to SIL. So I think that possibly, hopefully sums things up a little bit. Our speakers before that, we noted there were road concerns as well. So that's about as far as we are so far. Our next speakers are, if I can get these names right, they are speaking on affordable housing, and they are Helen Brzezowski and Maggie Rafalowicz, if I've pronounced those correctly. I think somebody's deliberately testing my my skills here. If we could have our next speakers, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is Helen Brzezowski and Maggie Rafalowicz. I don't know that Maggie's speaking this evening, but excellent interpretation of the names. Thank you.
I did try.
No, really good. People obviously often don't try, so excellent. Can I just introduce the project? Really, we've been working now for probably about 5-6 months with a number of officers about how you may widen the affordable housing offer at Manydown. We're not putting together the final document. What we're putting together is a technical evidence base that sets out, if you need to, why you need to, and if you find out that you need to, which we have, and I'll explain that to you, what type of products, what type of target groups, what type of tenures may you put forward. And what I want to take you through tonight is just one part of that research. It's an incredibly large element of work. If we take to the next slide, I'll just take you briefly through what we've been up to. So as I said, writing the technical evidence base for an affordable housing prospectus, and that's what's been agreed is the best way of explaining what it is we want to achieve at Manydown to open up the widest possible options of choice of new housing for local households and of course households that we want to attract. We have looked at an incredible amount of evidence base, not just data evidence in terms of a strategic housing market assessment and the numbers. We've also spoken to an awful lot of people through stakeholder work. We've also looked at all of the strategic policy documents of the councils and of Manydown research that's been commissioned to look at what the commitment is to widening the offer of affordable housing. And the way in which we've structured the work, we've looked at 4 different areas, and I'm going to talk particularly about the products this evening. We've looked about products, so what do we build and how do we get people into those homes? How do we build them? So how do we get them on the ground? What are the delivery mechanisms that we use? How do we best utilize our assets? What's the quality that we're after in terms of those products? How do we deliver at pace with consistent quality going forward? So this is modern methods of construction, factory-based production, and getting that consistency with the Manydown seller that I appreciate you're going to be looking at this evening. But also, if we're going to be delivering, what are the resident services? What's excellence in resident services? And that's not just for tenants of housing associations, but tenants of rented accommodation. Anyone who's living at Manydown, what are the expectations that we expect to see? So being quite wide-ranging. And if we move on to the next slide. So first and foremost, we looked at, is there an evidence base to widen the offer of affordable housing provision at Manydown? Your local plan at Basingstoke currently suggests that you can deliver 40% of affordable housing, 70% for rented, 30% intermediate tenure. So already we're seeing there's a need. That's what the numbers say we need to deliver. We've got a waiting list. We looked in April, we can look again, but you know, a fair few thousand people on that waiting list. And delivering new affordable homes is absolutely a key priority for the councils. If you also look at the documents and the research that's been commissioned through Manydown, absolutely running throughout it is that commitment to open up and widen the opportunity for people to move to Manydown regardless of income, regardless of need, so that there is choice. So the policy landscape absolutely meets this criteria. And also in the outline planning application, we certainly saw residents say we want to see greater access to affordable housing, we want to see more options for people who are locally living here to have choice. Interestingly, this year, just before lockdown, Basingstoke introduced something called own home loan. And forgive me if you're all aware of this, but basically it was a contribution, a 20% contribution to help people go out onto the open market and buy a home. They used committed sums from 106 negotiations to fund this. I think from memory 580,000, and they were oversubscribed for that by 400%, which to me just says there's a huge pent-up demand for people who want to buy a home. And whilst this isn't only just about that, it's very much about getting people into the tenure of their choice. Your evidence base tells us that almost half of households cannot afford owner occupation. And Help to Buy, which is a government product, we've got a big waiting list for that. Many people already in the borough who are on that waiting list. So that tells me we've got people on a waiting list for rent. We've got people on a waiting list for buying. We know we've got that demand. But whilst we've been doing this work, the National Affordable Housing products from Homes England have come out and changed. And one of the things we're seeing is first homes. And again, forgive me if you're aware of this, but that's going to be offering, in place of potentially shared ownership, first homes being offered at around about 30% discount from the market. And I'm not here to say that's right or wrong. What that is going to do is potentially reduce the buy-in levels of some of the products that we have previously seen, and therefore could have an impact on the opportunity for people to buy into Manydown. Let's move on. So first and foremost, next slide, thank you. First and foremost, we have the evidence, and there's an incredibly detailed document that sets all that out in an awful lot more detail than that. That says yes, we've got the information that says we need to widen that offer. There is incredible challenges around affordability, but it isn't just about widening the offer. It's also about pace. We know from research that's already been carried out that potentially, if we want to increase pace, looking at the types of products that we put on the ground at Manydown can do that. If we look at a model at the moment of 60-40, which is what we've got, so 60% market housing and 40% affordable housing, if we want to create more pace and bottom line funding, we need to mix that up a bit. We need to look at different products that will de-risk schemes for developers. And the evidence tells us that if we do that, we can increase delivery rates from about 220 to about 320 a year at Manydown. And of course, that isn't just about bringing homes forward for people in housing need, because we know we need that, but it's also about creating new communities quickly. We wanted to create that opportunity at Manydown. And so in doing that, the research suggests that if you move from 60-40 to a 40-40-20, where only 40% is market sale, 40% affordable as we have now, but 20% other tenures, build to rent, some people call that private rented sector, extra care, custom build, different types of opportunity, you've got the ability to do that. Next slide, please. One of the things that we spent a lot of time doing, and some things have touched on it this evening really, is about who are the target groups we're trying to attract and retain? Who are the target groups that we want to see access that housing? And we've built on the national affordable definitions in terms of housing need, where you have existing households and newly forming households. We've opened that up. We've looked at first-time buyers. We've looked at whether we've got tenants who aspire to and want to move into home ownership, key workers who are underpinning our National Health Service and other key worker occupations. Second stage move is really interesting, often forgotten, and probably one of the most difficult challenges for people to make. When people are buying a home, they move into it and then they grow. They get a partner, they may have children, and they stay in that home for as long as they possibly can, usually, until they need to make the move. And that second stage move can need 2 to 3 more bedrooms. It can need extra living space. It's an expensive move. And we don't want people to have to leave places just because they can't afford their next property move. We've looked at graduates, we've looked at people who are younger and what their options might be. And one of the things we've really focused on is people who want and choose to rent. Not everybody wants to buy. Many people can't buy, but not everybody wants to. So what is that real high quality, secure product that delivers great services over a time period with security of tenure for people who choose to do that? And we've looked at specialist housing as well. Older people, people with mental health challenges, learning disabilities. So we have really tried to widen that up. Next slide, please. I think what's really important when we try and put this into some perspective of what products we want to bring forward, there's some things we need to think about. There's a balance to strike here between what type of homes do we want to build, what size, what type, where, what sort of support and services should they have. But then there's about 10 years of choice. So some people want to rent, some people want to buy, and there's products in between, so intermediate housing as well. And how do we balance that alongside then securing people into those products? So it's all very well building something and putting it at this price, but if people locally can't afford it, we're not doing what we're trying to set out to achieve. So we've had a range of principles we've been trying to work within, but also as we've gone through this process, the Homes England and government have introduced a range of new national products, which are, you know, fascinating, interesting, and yet to sort of consider how the impact will be. But we do need to think that there is consistency between what we're putting forward and what government's saying. So the new shared ownership model where people can buy in at lower levels, the first homes product I talked about where people can have a 30% discount for the market. We need to ensure that what we're putting in place complements those products, doesn't try to replace them in any way, because why would we, and adds the value that we're looking for. Next slide, please. The other thing, I think, I've been setting up products for years now. I started to do them after the credit crunch and helped lots of authorities and housing associations put products together. And I've come up with some great and exciting products, and they're fantastic. But, you know, what's important is simplicity. They have to be attractive to the people who are going to be using them, because if they don't understand how they work and they don't like them, they won't use them. That said, as well, we're not in the game really of probably giving mortgages. We need to rely on primary lending institutions like Halifax, and I'm sure there are other lenders out there, but I use that example. We need to align with those, because we need for those organisations to understand what we're trying to achieve. And when our product goes against their lending criteria, they're comfortable with it. So we need to follow existing legal mechanisms that we see out there, like Help to Buy, for example. We want to see applicability elsewhere. Just because this works at Manydown doesn't mean it doesn't have opportunities to work across Basingstoke, and we'd like to see that opportunity work. And of course, what I think is really important is we can come up with any options we want to, things that in theory will work, but we need to be really aware that this has to deliver on the ground at the bottom line. So developers, the registered providers, investors, people who are putting their money into Manydown, it has to deliver returns as well. And that's a real balance for us to find. Next slide, please. So what are we putting towards? I think what we're not trying to say, before I go through this process, we're not trying to say it must be these. We're not trying to say the product must do this, it must be. What we're trying to establish is a framework and a range of principles about what we are trying to achieve at Manydown, to give the flexibility for those people who are trying to deliver it, and opportunities to create innovation, to think about new products, to think about how best they meet our criteria. We know we need a range of rented products, and we know from our affordability work that social rent is the most affordable product. But it's challenging to deliver. It requires far more subsidy. It is far more expensive in that sense in delivery, although it has a huge outcome and positivity for people in terms of affordability. So how may we do that? How may we use our assets better? And that, of course, is a different part of the research, looking at how we deliver more social rent. But there absolutely is a priority to do that. We've come up with the term Basingstoke living rent. You might have heard of London living rent. Other people have their living rents. And I think what we're trying to say there is, we know that not everything can be social rent, but you do have to demonstrate to us that local people can afford it. So you do have to show us why people in the population living in Manydown who are in housing need and Basingstoke can afford this living rent. Normally it's about 60 to 65% of market rents, but I think that is to be determined. It may have options to buy at the end of it, it may not. Finally, we've been looking at the opportunities of build to rent, and as I said, some people will know that as the private rented sector. The build to rent model that government have launched sets out an affordable private rent product, and that is about 20% of the market. So again, we've got some different price brackets of rent here and different opportunities to get into different rental models. So I think we've got a pretty decent broad spectrum to put into a prospectus that says, this is what we're expecting, and these are the kinds of products we would like to see. When we're selling, I think Help to Buy has been an incredibly popular product. It's going to be taken out of circulation in March 2023. We don't know whether it will be replaced, and we suspect that maybe First Homes has replaced it. To me, that is quite challenging, because at the moment what we see is an affordable housing provision where, for example, in Basingstoke, we'd see 70% for rent and 30% for intermediate tenures, probably shared ownership. We would then also see Help to Buy. So we're helping widen the opportunity. And if we have First Homes potentially replacing shared ownership and Help to Buy doesn't exist, how do we support those people that need to move into home ownership? If you recall, I spoke about the own home loan, which offers a 20% deposit level, I guess, into purchase. And that's the same sort of thing as what we're offering here. What we're saying is, if you use a shared equity mechanism, so the legal mechanism that primary lending institutions support, there is huge flexibility to reduce the purchase price of properties at Manydown, and also therefore the deposit requirements, and therefore the ability to get better opportunities on the mortgage market. It's also such an incredibly flexible product that it can take land assets, it can take financial assets, and it can deliver return for the councils over time. And I would have said the DevCo, but I now have to call it the Manydown development vehicle. It can deliver them different opportunities over time to create future revenue income streams, and also help local people. So real opportunities about their sale products. We also introduced something called Rent Plus. It's not necessary that we want Rent Plus to come in. Rent Plus is a product that's bought into by institutional investors, and it offers a buy-in to home ownership over a flexible time period, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. There's different types of products on the market, and I don't think we're saying it's this one. I think what we're saying is there are opportunities and there are interesting products out there that other people will pay for, and we probably want to explore what they are, and we would encourage providers to look at how they may work at Manydown. So we are opening up that opportunity as well. But I think, just to reiterate, we're not saying these are the products. We're setting the framework and the principles, but what we are being very clear about is we're looking about increasing choice, and we're looking about increasing affordability. Next slide, please. So some of the things we're looking at in terms of what we're building. So if we look at our needs assessment work, it's going to tell us to build 1-bed homes all day long. And absolutely, we need to build 1-bed homes. We know that there are people that need smaller accommodation. But what we are interested in doing is how we may future-proof that accommodation for families to grow, to build mixed communities, so that we are giving lots of people different opportunities. So we're looking at how we may balance what the straight data said, which is useful but not always the right thing on the ground, with a different range and choice of homes, so we have that mixed incomes and mixed scale community. We're looking at the options of custom build and community housing, so we have better engagement with local people. And one of the outcomes that we know of custom build and community housing is more affordable housing. It isn't always at scale, although it really is improving in the way in which those models work. So we've been looking at those. And we've looked in quite some detail about the different opportunities for older people and other specialist groups, people with mental health problems, learning disabilities, physical disabilities, for example, and looking at what are the frameworks and what are the standards that we want to be delivering around independence, our own front door, having some mixed tenure opportunities, which may also help viability, but increase choice as well. And where in Manydown do they need to be? Next slide, please. We did some extensive stakeholder work, some of you I spoke to. We had huge support to widen the offer for affordable housing. I don't think we've got any kick about that at all. We had a real cry for keeping it simple, and I think we have tried to do that. We did a number of think pieces around how this would work, and the first one was a little more complicated. We have really streamed that in line with that. We had huge support for those target groups, and the products, yeah, we put a whole load of products out there, but they were all supported in their own way. But we definitely got a message that we don't need them all, and we've absolutely reflected that. Next slide, please. So what do we do next with this? Well, we're pulling all of that evidence into a final document. And then from that, we will be recommending what goes into that affordable housing prospectus. And that will be your message out to the delivery world about what you expect to see. I'm sure there will be more information from our research coming to you, but as I say, it's been wide ranging and extensive. Interesting, we had the question about COVID tonight. We've spent quite a lot of time looking at COVID in the final report and the ways in which we may need to alter our thinking. So one of the things fundamentally has been the importance of affordable housing was always there, even more so post-COVID or during COVID. The impact of good quality, secure, well-designed homes are so important in terms of COVID. The potential impact on delivery and numbers, we've not seen it yet, but we know there are certainly research out there that says numbers are going to drop in terms of delivery. So bringing more affordable housing forward and the different types of products we're talking about, de-risking schemes can keep pace going, one of the things that we need to see. Space and design standards is something we spent a long time on. So perhaps for residents who share facilities, how we best need to work that through within specialist accommodation, and the 15-minute neighbourhood, how we create places and neighbourhoods where people can live and receive their services and access services in a much smaller environment. So we've given that some thought. I know we won't have got it right entirely. We're all still learning, but we have, in answer to the question this evening, spent a bit of time thinking of that. So next slide really is just a thank you and questions. We're happy to take any. We haven't covered all our research tonight. As I say, it's very wide ranging, but I'm more than happy to take any questions that are available, Chair.
Thank you very much, Maggie. And I'm sure somebody's got a question. Who'd like to kick it off? Councillor James.
Probably not a question, just a rambling history lesson. Hopefully I'll try and turn it into a question during the course of it. Obviously, I've lived in Basingstoke for 48 and a half years, so I know it well. I am London overspill. My family wanted to escape living in a flat and move to the new town that is Basingstoke. And so there we are. And then they were, in the 80s, they were the couples that bought the council houses, and that money was stored away to buy Manydown to serve the needs of the local people. And so I think the affordable bit is really important, because whatever strange definition of affordable the government have this week, if the people of Basingstoke cannot afford to live in Manydown, then it's not homes for local people. We only purchased it to provide homes for local people. So it has to absolutely be affordable, and that's an absolute priority. You mentioned in your presentation about, you look at the data and actually you need to build lots of one-bedroom places. Absolutely right. That is what the data tells us, and that's part of the legacy of that massive expansion of Basingstoke, where certainly when I grew up in Popley in the 70s, in London with toddler children, I was one of the toddler children, and obviously there's now lots of widows and old couples living in those houses. They escaped London and moved to Basingstoke to avoid living in a flat. So when we build one-bedroom flats and say, can you move out of your three-bedroom family home into that one-bedroom flat? They don't want to do that. They change their entire life to avoid that. So I think you look at the housing need on a piece of paper, you look at the housing reality of what people want to live in. People living in places like the Popleys and the Winkleberries do not want to move into a one-bedroom flat. They move their entire lives 50 miles to this new town to avoid living in a flat. So I think we have to be realistic about that. So I think the affordability is actually important. I'm really disappointed with government schemes that tend to just generally inflate house prices. They don't actually achieve any greater level of affordability. And I think the affordability of Manydown is very much in the design and the speed of delivery and modern build technologies. I know there's a lot of stuff about prefab housing, and when you say prefab, people get really scared, and the idea of an IKEA house is very frightening. Technology has moved on. We have to stop building bricks and mortar where we don't have the labour to do it. It takes ages to do it. We don't have the mineral resources to do it. We've got to build effectively and efficiently modern homes very quickly. I don't understand why people in very cold climates are living in wooden framed houses that are knocked up in weeks, and yet in our fairly moderate climate of Basingstoke, we insist on living in bricks and mortar. We've got to look at modern build technology and make sure we can put up these houses quicker. That's what reduces the cost, because the developer doesn't need to borrow the money for quite so long. They can sell their houses into the market quicker. We can build quicker. That reduces the price. That makes it more affordable straight away. I think the other thing I'd want to mention is key worker housing. There's this thing about homes for local people, as if that just means people born in Basingstoke should live in Basingstoke. I don't think there's anyone on this committee or anyone in this council who doesn't want a really good and well-functioning NHS. They don't want safer streets and lots of police officers. We've talked earlier tonight about the importance of schools and how we want to make sure that we have good primary schools and develop new secondary schools. If teachers cannot afford to live here, that will not happen. So we've got to build homes for key workers, absolutely critical, particularly with an aging population. If social care workers can't afford to live in Basingstoke, who the hell is going to look after us when we get old? So I think key work housing is an absolutely massive issue, and we shouldn't lose sight of that as part of Manydown. We can design it, we can shape it to the affordability, particularly for key workers, and packages of deals that work for key workers, absolutely massively important, and we shouldn't just sort of lose that somewhere in the ether. So I think everything I've heard tonight from that presentation, I think there's lots and lots of positive, but I think it really does need to be pushed even harder, the importance of key worker housing and true affordability. Let's not get lost in the government definition of affordability. Let's talk about, can people live in Basingstoke, can key workers, can those children who will currently in the playgrounds but will be buying into Manydown, can they truly afford to live there? And true affordability, I think, is really, really important. And we shouldn't knock social housing or not social housing. I appreciate it's really expensive. The only final thing I would mention as well, and I think it probably widens the topic of, we've talked a lot about COVID, the impact of COVID and more people working from home. That's going to have a massive impact on who wants to rent office spaces now. What does the commercial property market look like in the future? Have we got the balance right in Manydown? Should we actually be building slightly bigger, more spacious homes and slightly less commercial property to reflect how the world is going to change in the post-COVID world? I thought that there is a question that's probably not really particularly at this particular presentation, but as a wider thing.
Thank you, Gavin. My piece of paper in front of me says questions and debates. So if anybody has anything they wish to add, whether it be a question or a debate, I'm more than happy to bring you in. Anybody else? I can't see any hands up at all. No, I don't see any hands. Oh, Councillor Chris Tomlin, and then Simon Mahaffey.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's really to reinforce elements of what Gavin has just said. I think this looking to making houses of more innovative design, manufacturing, that type of thing, encouraging this forward thinking to ultimately reduce the cost and get exactly the need. And I do share this feeling, this sentiment of where the money came from for Manydown. So I think it's very key that we capture this. And again, we don't just become a vehicle for what the government is saying. We've got to come up with some things for ourselves and maybe helping to make things less expensive to build. And later on, we'll talk energy efficiency, etc., because they need to be cheap to run. That's the other thing. People don't want to spend lots of money on energy. So we've got to bring that factor in as well. So, yep, there are a bit of debate and I support that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mahaffey.
Yeah, I fully support what's just been said by the two previous speakers about the need for affordability. My concern, and I think this is probably a question that is too big for us as a committee and probably too big for the whole Manydown development, is I've long had a problem with our attitude as a country, as a population towards the idea of home ownership. That we assume that everyone should be in a position to own a home, and therefore everyone aspires to own a home that will appreciate in value. As a result, you get people that are buying starter homes, and I appreciate that you might need to move on through the growth of your family, but I do think that homes should be designed as homes rather than an investment that I intend to stick at for 2, 3, 4 years and then move on. Because if that's the attitude, you don't invest socially in your community. And I say this because my wife's German. And over in Germany, people will spend their entire lives in rented accommodation, and they'll buy. My wife's parents have actually bought their house when in their early 20s, and they're still there now, and they're in their 80s. And there's no social stigma associated with that. Unfortunately, in this country, we have this attitude that if you're renting a property, you either can't afford to buy a home, or you're just doing it temporarily whilst your home is being painted or done up or whatever. And I'm just interested to figure out how we can turn this turnaround so that we can say, you know, it is perfectly acceptable, and not just the small handful of people that you know choose to live in rented accommodation, but it's actually not necessary for you to be a valid member of society to have ownership of a house. You can still contribute to a community by renting it, but we need to encourage people to rent longer term. Otherwise, you just get the people that can't afford a house, or the people who've got no intention of staying there for long. You don't get the development of communities as a result. I don't know there's an answer to it, but I just kind of felt I needed to get it off my chest.
Thank you for that, Simon. As you say, I don't really think that's something that's going to get answered tonight. Does anybody else have any questions or comments on tonight? Right, I don't see anybody. So thank you very much, Helen, for your presentation. It was,
Chair.
Yeah, sorry, yes.
No, I said thank you, Chair.
All right, sorry. Okay, thank you for your presentation. Very helpful. Right, I'll have a quick recap again before we move on. The notes I've made is that on the affordable housing, whether it's affordable to rent or buy or any form of mixed tenure, it is vastly oversubscribed. And we need innovative design to speed things up, and we need to keep it all to be energy efficient. And we need to have the facility for what I've written down as residential mobility. So people starting in small homes, like most of us, moving up to something bigger as the family comes along. And that, is everybody happy with that as a quick recap? Wonderful. In that case, we will move on to our next presentation, which is the MDV LLP from Richard Copper. No, it isn't. It's the Manydown Standard presentation from Paul Siniglio.
Yep. Hi, thank you, Chairman. Good evening. I hope you can all hear me. I'll leave the camera off, Jess, for this part. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Okay, so yeah, I'm Paul Cornelio. I work for BM3E, which is part of Bolton Mossman Chartered Building Surveyors based in Petersfield. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to share with you some of the work that we've done on the Manydown standard this evening. So Jess, if we could go on to the next slide, please. What I'm going to run through the presentation contents, a quick look at the aims and objectives of developing the standard and the approach that we followed, the structure that emerged from that. I'll show you the recommendations. Won't have time to go into all of those in the time that I have available to speak with you. So I'll just pick out, I'll just pick out a few. Sorry, seem to be, are we okay? We're switching between presentations then. Okay, I'll carry on. So I'll just highlight a few of the recommendations to run over this evening. Also, we'll look at the cost benchmarking exercise that we undertake and talk about some conclusions and next steps. It's fair to say that this was an evolving brief in conjunction with the council's develop the standards, and during the period that we were creating the standard, which was probably over 18 months, the government announced consultation on their future home strategy. So that did change our thinking at that point. And it's also fair to say that in the future, I would anticipate seeing the Manydown standard evolve as well. Okay, if we could go on to the next slides. So the strategic aims was really to reflect the Manydown vision and principles. You've got your 10 guiding principles, and of course an important one of these is about maintaining high standards of design quality and sustainability. We wanted to create a bespoke best practice solution that was differentiated from standard housing design, but we didn't want to include items in the standard that just for the sake of it, that wouldn't add any value. So we were particularly careful when we were looking what to include and what not to. A key part of the brief that we received was to make sure that the Manydown standard is commercially deliverable at scale and suitable for a range of volume house builders. So we did want something to be mainstream. We could have, for instance, said, right, let's build all these new houses to a passive house standard, like a gold sort of standard, but that wasn't going to suit the delivery of how Manydown will be approached. And also, of course, important that we were responsive to the Basingstoke and the Hampshire County Council climate change motions, the emergencies that have been declared there. And what we've come up with the Manydown standard is something really that puts you on a trajectory for meeting higher standards in the future. And as government legislation changes, you'll be a step ahead of that legislation, but it allows you to grow and build as you get more experience in the coming years. Excuse me. Yes, please, Jess Winkle. Sorry about that. So how do we go about this? Well, we started off with some desktop research and identify key issues that we confirmed with Basingstoke and Hampshire. We took our thinking and compared that with other best practice housing standards, for instance, the Building Research Establishment's Home Quality Mark. And then we started to do some detailed energy modelling on different house types, seeing what the difference would be with different insulation levels, different types of microgeneration as well. And all of this helped to form our evidence base. And from there, we were able to come out with recommendations. And having done that, it was then important that we went through the cost uplift benchmarking, which I'll come on to later. So we can move on. Jess, please. Thank you. So through our work, 6 elemental themes emerged, and we established these. You can see them there: design, space and accessibility, environmental sustainability. There's 6 recommendations under that one: quality assurance, innovation and technology, and community consultation. So under these 6 themes, in total, there's 16 key recommendations that we've made. And if we go on to the next slide, please, you can see those in this ring diagram. Now, I could probably talk, for 15 minutes on each of these, and there just simply isn't enough time tonight. So if you wanted to read into these more, you'd have to get a hold of a copy of the Manydown standard reports. But anyway, you can see how these recommendations fit below each of the themes, I hope, here. If we move to the next slide. So giving you a little more detail on a number of these recommendations. So we proposed setting a trajectory towards meeting the government's zero carbon aspirations, and also the Manydown standard aligns with the government's clean growth strategy, which is very much going to see a more electric based future, low carbon heating, and a move towards more low emission vehicles, electric vehicles as well. We were keen to reflect the government's thinking around the future home standard. Now, this is due to be introduced in 2 stages through changes to building regulations. The first stage is expected to be introduced probably next year, and then the full future home standard will be introduced by 2025. And that does represent quite an increase on the current standards. So we looked at very much a fabric first approach. It's always important to make sure that you're pushing the insulation of the building, the walls, the roof, the floors, the windows, first of all. And by doing that, you tend to get the right results. You don't end up unnecessarily sizing heating, for example. Also, we wanted to go with low carbon heating, and heat pumps are going to be a major feature of how we heat our new and existing homes in the future as well. We also have heat recovery ventilation. It's important if we're building quite airtight homes that we're bringing a good supply of fresh air in at all time, but we're also able to reclaim some of the waste heat and recirculate that in the home. To help us push towards the zero carbon standards, we would expect to see quite a bit of solar PV panels on the development, but we've suggested that they're deployed as a site-wide target so that we end up with panels on the more favourable roof slopes where they'll generate the most electricity. And obviously the best orientated roofs that are unshaded as well. Something quite innovative that we're talking about here is we're actually suggesting that we go for an all electric development. So our recommendation would be to not bring any gas infrastructure onto site. The government's advisor on climate change, the Committee on Climate Change, you may have seen that they're advocating that from 2025 they wouldn't expect to see gas boilers in new homes any longer. So that is interesting, and we've aligned ourselves with that. If you look at the bar chart at the bottom there, on the left-hand side, you can see where current building regulations sit. And then on the right-hand side, you could see something that would represent zero carbon, i.e. an 100% improvement on what we currently have. Now, we're pitching the Manydown standard at about a 50% improvement on current standards, so midway between these 2 points. The government's future home standard, as I said, coming in 2025 is around the 75% mark there. So, you know, it is important that the house builders start to get familiar with these more stretching targets before we push too far. So, you know, it is up in the ante, but we're not going directly to zero carbon, or at least that's not what we're advocating. If we can go on to the next slide, please, Jess. Thank you. So another innovative idea that we've had is around a carbon offset fund. These are quite commonly used in London, the London boroughs. When we're building new homes, it's very difficult, and in fact, in most situations, not possible to get them to exactly zero carbon. We end up with something that we call some residual emissions, and this might be half a tonne or a quarter of a tonne of CO2 emissions from a house each year associated with its heating, hot water, and lighting. And with a carbon offset fund, the developer would buy out of this to offset and invest that fund into something ring-fenced. Normally, the ring-fence funds are reinvested in retrofitting in the same area, but what we're suggesting to do is to reinvest these funds back into upholding the build quality of Manydown. This is something really key that we want to achieve. That ties in with the next point around quality assurance. It's well known in the industry, and there's quite a lot of concern between something that's known as the design versus as-built performance gap. And what this means is the way we design homes, when they're actually built and people live in them, they don't actually perform as per the design intention. And there is evidence that perhaps we're using 40 to 60% more energy because of this gap in the design to the as-built performance. So really important. What we'd like to do at Manydown is to narrow that gap as far as we possibly can. And one way of doing that is something called an assured performance process. This is something that's being developed by the National Energy Foundation and the Good Homes Alliance. And it's a whole process that goes through every phase of the construction process, from design right through the build to completion, that really focuses on narrowing this gap and making sure that performance is as good as it possibly can be. We also want to aim for a policy of zero defects. It's very much a frustration for people when they move in their new homes if they have problems with defects afterwards. So we would need a set of processes to address that. We want to carry out post-occupancy evaluation once people have been in their homes perhaps for a year, and we've gathered performance data of how much their homes are actually costing them to run. Are they comfortable, for example? Learning from that can be fed back into the learning loop, and then the Manydown standard can be updated for the benefit of future home owners and tenants. In support of this, we feel that there's going to need to be a couple of new roles created, one that we're calling a new homes engineer and a Manydown community manager. Important that people, when they move into their new home, that they understand how to operate it, to run it, to get the optimum performance from that. And people are often too busy and don't read the manual and or the handover pack, and having some one-on-one engagement with a community manager can really help to get those messages across. So if we could move on, please. Thank you. We would like to develop a home comfort standards. So thermal comfort is important all year round, not just in winter, but with our changing climate, it's essential now that we think about comfort in summer. And there have been up and down the country quite a lot of new build homes, particularly flats, that are at risk from overheating when we get heat waves in the summer. This is a real problem. So it's important to model the buildings correctly to avoid this. I can say more about that later if you're interested. But other issues around health and comfort, noise attenuation, indoor air quality, and natural daylighting. So I can expand on those later. Trying to reflect Basingstoke's reputation as something of a technical hub, we want to look at innovation, and I've already mentioned about the all-electric developments, and we would need to work closely with the district network operator, Scottish and Southern Energy, around this, but we would like to propose a smart grid, so supply and demand is properly managed, and there's digital management and communications that control that. We would like to look at the option for perhaps for some embedded energy storage, some batteries to help perhaps power nighttime electrical loads when the solar panels can't perform. And we'd also need to think about the site-wide electric vehicle charging strategy. But just to reiterate here, what's important is we're going for all electric heating and all the car charging. We need to make sure that the local grid has capacity. Perhaps it will need to be reinforced. And for this reason, it is important that we have these conversations soon with the district network operator. Also the connected home, so we don't only want green homes, we want intelligent homes as well. And home controls have come on leaps and bounds now, and a lot of people are able to control their home via a smartphone app, and we would expect to see innovations such as this. Also, a home information dashboard that it may tell you when the next bus is coming along, but it could also benchmark your energy performance against your neighbours, so you can understand your consumption patterns and see how you're doing. And also, all of the monitoring equipment will help us to gain invaluable insight into how the homes and the Manydown standard is performing as well. If we move to the next slides. Thank you. So cost benchmarking, this was absolutely critical. You know, it's fair to say that building more sustainable housing, it does come at a cost, but we do need to think throughout the life of the assets and the benefits that we can get from building to better standards. But it is nonetheless important that the Manydown standard didn't represent significantly increased costs compared to standard housing designs. It's got to be commercially viable. Now, all house builders are going to face some level of cost uplifts as the future home standard is introduced. And as I said, that's going to happen in two stages. The cost to build a home will increase in 2020, 2021, when building regulations change, and again in 2025. So we estimated the cost uplifts from the standards as it is currently against current building regulations. And here we estimated to build to the Manydown standards that it would cost an extra £151 to £168 per metre square, or you can see the total equivalent there on the build costs. At the time the development work starts, when the first step to introduce the future home standards come along, that reduces to £80 to £85 a metre square. And again, when the future home standard is fully introduced in 2025, we'd expect to see further reductions, because this will be the new normal. All house builders will have to deliver to this standard. It will be the minimum building regulations. These cost uplifts are extra over what you'd expect for typical large-scale public sector housing procurement developments, and they do vary depending on the unit type. We didn't factor into these cost uplifts major gas infrastructure. That's very difficult to price up the gas main within the roads, but if that's factored in, if we can do the all electric development, then the extra over costs have potential to reduce further. Next slide, please. So some justification around the cost uplift. We would expect to see some revenue recovery by way of adopting these higher standards and creating a place where people want to live, now and in the long-term future. Also, the homes, as has been touched on earlier, will be cheaper to run. Now, if the capital value of the home is a little bit higher and people need to borrow a little bit more, we think that the outgoing should be broadly neutral, because the running costs of the homes will be reduced. Also, something that we feel is likely to generate increased demand and saleability, and this has been touched on as well tonight, is more generous space standards and adaptable living space. Perhaps it will be possible to put roof trusses on the roof, which make it easy to convert that space to add an extra bedroom in the future. Within the Manydown standard, we've also spoke about having non-load bearing partitions in the house, so these can be easily moved around as a family grows, or perhaps somebody develops a disability in the future. The cost uplifts also justify because we do need to respond to the climate change emergencies. That's in all of our interests. And also the enhanced home comfort standards. I think consumers are increasingly interested around health and comfort now. It's quite a saleable commodity. People perhaps aren't so interested in how many tons of CO2 their home emits, but they want good air quality, they want good day lighting, they don't want drafts in their home. So that, and together with smart technology, the Internet of Things, again, I believe if somebody went into a Manydown home and saw the ability to control that from their smartphone app, as opposed to another home where that wasn't possible, I'd like to think that they'd be more attracted to the Manydown standard homes. Next slide, please. So some conclusions. The way we've pitched the standard, I believe that it would show real leadership. It is pushing the boundary, but it is remaining commercially deliverable and a mainstream solution. We're getting close to zero carbon. The government's aspirations for net zero by 2050 are still some way off, but it's important we place ourselves on this trajectory to start working towards delivering that through new homes. We're promoting very much high quality design and placemaking. There's a potential here to promote ourselves as being the first all-electric garden town, perhaps, which is quite an innovative thing in itself. And the government, linked to their clean growth strategy, I believe are going to be very interested in seeing how easy this is to do, and there could potentially be grant funding to help research to confirm the viability of all-electric developments of this scale. Also, the standard reflects Basingstoke's reputation as a smart tech hub, as I said. We're looking to quality assure the product, the housing product, and also to future-proof it. The Manydown standard would actually be a certificated scheme to give the residents confidence in it and what it's all about. We're looking to differentiate ourselves from standard housing designs, as I've said, and collectively would hope that all this would help to increase demand for the housing. Next slides. I think that may Yeah, okay, right. Some next steps. So, as I said, there's a lot of detail behind this presentation, but the Manydown standard would need to be fully endorsed by the councils, and then also the standard would need to be endorsed by and agreed by the development company. A next step would be to present this and the cost benchmarking to Urban and Civic, your master developer, and then we need to start to look at how the Manydown standard in operation would go ahead, agree the process for that. We need to come up in support of that with a design brief and some performance specifications. We don't want to be overly prescriptive to developers how they meet the standard, that they can look at their house types and how much they insulate a home to, you know, to meet the standard. So it's about setting a performance standard, and then they can innovate to meet that. And as I said, we need to liaise with the district network operator at an early stage. So thank you for that. I think the final slide has got my contact details on there, but happy to take questions, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Paul. Before we go to questions, we're just over 2 hours now. Do we need to take a vote at 2 hours to continue? Is everybody happy to keep going? Good. I thought you would be, but I've got to ask after what happened with development control last week. First one, Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for your in-depth presentation there. I was certain elements I was very pleased. I like the idea of this solar PV and battery storage and those sort of things, and some thinking, proactive thinking there. One of the questions that I've got about 3 questions, but we've got this timeline. We've got the government standards for green housing and whatever coming on 2021, 22, and then to 2025, and you gave this sort of view of the uplift of cost to the developer per square metre, etc. How difficult would it be to calculate versus the delivery rate of this site? I.e., we're not going to start developing for probably, I don't know, 3 years or whatever by the time we start laying. I may be wrong on that, but when we start laying bricks or whatever we're going to use. So a proportion of these 3,000 houses are going to be built to one standard, and then we're going to walk into 2025 and presumably have to build to another building standard, which will enhance the cost or reduce it, as your metrics were saying. So really, what would be, I'm looking at for a figure of what the on cost might be if we could try and get the 2025 standard from day one, and what that would mean in terms of an investment by somebody, a third party, some way that Manydown could be seen from day one to be at these higher standards and funded in another way. Now, where that money comes from is another debate, but it's really how much are we talking about? We're talking at so much per square foot, and how many houses we're going to do, and how many houses are then going to have to change their standard. Hopefully you can understand. So that's one sort of fundamental question. And the other one was this carbon offset. I'd like to sort of understand, explore that a little bit. Reinvesting in upholding the build quality. I'm really not quite sure what that's all about. And then 2 other requests. One is that we do get a copy of the report from somebody, please. Just a thought, you touched on the intelligence and smart systems. This home engineer, or I think you referred to him as home engineer, or would help people. Could they be somehow almost a big brother and monitor how houses are doing, and then go around and knock on doors and say, you're not using your app very well, or something like that? I don't know, some form of policing of it, monitoring. So a few questions there, if you could give me some answer, please.
Yes. First of all, the Manydown standard is consistent with the future home standard when it comes in 2025. So it's just that the cost uplift above normal practice will reduce at those 2 stages. So we have very much aligned it to the government's future home standards already. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, where I was coming from is if we wanted to do it earlier, how much is it going to cost? forget who's paying, but you know,
Well,
we're talking 20, 30 million, or we're talking 2 or 3 million on, you know.
Yeah, you will broadly be complying with the government's future home standard as soon as you start building the homes. In actual fact,
Yeah, I know, but if it's coming in at 2025, where it's going to be enhanced, and it will cost more to build, is what you're saying. Except everybody would have to take the hit. If we wanted that hit to be taken earlier, what's it going to cost, given the number of houses we would be delivering, because we're only just starting to deliver? I'm trying to say is if I, you know, if it's £100 million or something to give to the developers to make the houses to 2025 standard, there might be a way of funding this. I'm not going to go into how we can, but if it's less than that, there must be a way of trying to work this out.
I mean, the extra over costs that I gave are for the whole Manydown standard, not only the energy aspects and complying with the future homes standards.
I mean, I suppose we're looking, you know, it's about discounting why we can't be looking for passive house standards, why we can't be going forward and making Manydown a standard. If it costs money, well, that's a question for the borough to decide whether it might look for funding to try and help this situation. I mean, I'm a bit concerned that you've got your targets of 2050 in the government. We as a borough have signed up to getting, you know, as neutral as we can for 2030.
Yeah.
But what we don't want to do is start doing carbon offsets, because that's completely crazy.
Yeah, I mean, there's acknowledgement even within the government's future home standard that it isn't really possible to get homes to net zero carbon, and you know, you can start to look at all the embodied energy of materials as well, but that's not really the way that the industry works. So I think a lot of the reduction in the carbon is going to have to come about through ongoing grid decarbonisation. We've made some significant strides with that recently with all the wind turbines, and it looks like that's set to continue. But on site, it's just not possible to reach a zero carbon standard. The closer you get to zero carbon, it becomes more about how much on-site electricity you can generate, and there just won't be enough area on the roof to accommodate the solar panels to do that. So we're looking to get, you know, close to zero, close as we possibly can.
Yeah, okay. Well, I suppose it's the timeline I'm really saying about bringing it forward, and what is the on cost? Anyway, perhaps it's a question that could come back to us at some stage.
For sure, I can certainly speak to Andrew and look at that and reply to you, more Councillor Tomblin. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It'll be Councillor Mahaffey, followed by Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, I'm sorry, I've got to disagree with you on the aspiration of zero carbon or not. I mean, I just set the scene. Was dismayed. I heard on Radio 4 this morning the Great Barrier Reef, 1,400 miles of reef. They've just announced this morning that it's halved in size because of climate change. This has to be our first priority. And you did say right at the beginning, I wrote it down, you said passive house standard, you know, following on from what Chris has said, passive house standard should be regarded as the gold standard. I entirely agree, but it's not going to be deliverable. Now, we know from, you know, I started work on carbon offsets in 1995. We know from technology that was around then, we can make one house carbon positive. We know from the bedstead development, we can make 100 houses carbon positive. My question is, why can't we make 3,500 houses carbon positive? And if I can answer the question myself, I think, you tell me if I'm wrong, technically, it is entirely feasible. So the only reason you said it's not going to be deliverable, presumably, is because of the additional cost. Now, I fully understand economics behind these things, and I understand that people have got developers have got to make money on it as well. But trying to sell a house that is nearly carbon zero, it's a little bit more efficient than other houses, well, that's not really that attractive to me. But if you say this development is absolutely carbon zero or even carbon positive, that's something people understand, and that's something that's very marketable. And I believe if we did this right, these houses could command a premium, whereby the developers make money. But the problem there is it's not been done before. So it needs a very brave developer to do that, or a very strong council to enforce that. Now, the question therefore is it technology that's stopping us doing it? I think no. Or is it the cost that's stopping us doing it? I think yes. Therefore, if it's the cost, we can then start looking at carbon offsets, and not the carbon offset fund you've talked about, but making the project itself a carbon offset. Because carbon offsets rely on the concept of additionality. Now, additionality is about me investing my money or you investing your money into a scheme that would not happen were it not for that investment. Now, that's very difficult to understand, or it's very difficult to achieve, because you're not just looking about now, you're looking about in the future. So you can't invest in solar farms, for example, because solar farms are currently economic. So the argument is they're going to happen anyway. If we go back to passive house design is not economic, then the offset is based upon the investment that will tip it over the edge to make it carbon positive. So if we say, take Chris's figure of 100 million to develop all these houses, if the additional cost is going to be another 5 million, then there's no reason why we can't sell that 5 million as a carbon offset, get external investment, which will tip it over the edge, make the whole development carbon positive, and they will then hopefully demand a premium. And sorry, if I can make one further comment or one further question. Apologies for this. You mentioned one of the objectives is zero defects, and you said this is because defects are very unsatisfactory to customers. Defects are more unsatisfactory to developers because they actually cost them money. So I'm intrigued to know how we're going to actually control defects, because all developers build to a theoretical zero defect standard. It's just when it goes wrong. So how are we going to enforce that?
Yeah. Okay. Quite a bit there. Yeah, I mean, with passive house, it is seen as a very good way to approach things. You're super insulating a home. You're making it very, very airtight. You're really investing in the fabric of the building. The fabric of the home is going to be there at least 60, 100 years. Whereas when we're investing in renewable technologies, perhaps they only have a life of 20, 30 years. So it's sensible to invest your money in the fabric with passive house, and passive houses perform well. There's less of a design versus as-built performance gap with passive houses, but a passive house in itself isn't zero carbon. It will have a greatly reduced space heating use. But if you're looking to get to zero carbon in the way that it's calculated under building regulations, it will come down to on-site electrical generation. So I think it's more of a design constraint that, as I mentioned earlier to Councillor Tomblin, that I just don't think you will have the roof area available to get you to a zero carbon. And then if you're generating electricity, on site, you probably want most of that to be used in the building first of all. You may not get enough charge into a battery, for example. So you may need to look at off-site solutions in order, if you wanted to class your development as zero carbon. I think the other thing with passive house is it's still fairly niche. It is certainly growing in popularity. Exeter City Council have done a lot. They've been doing passive house for 10 years, and it's their mainstream approach, but it isn't the mainstream approach of volume house builders. And as I understand, they will in the main be delivering the development. There is going to be some self-build, there's going to be some modern methods of construction. Perhaps those schemes could look to go further. I completely get your point about additionality. That is important. We said about the carbon offset fund, we thought it would be more palatable to reinvest that money so it's still used on site to guarantee the performance of the homes, and that's achieved. Because it isn't currently. And you are right. I think if you want to get to zero carbon, and there is a cost premium there, and part of our brief was pushing the boundaries here but keeping it commercially deliverable at scale. I think that's the...
I've got to come back on that. I fully accept that passive house in itself, there is embodied energy we have to account for. There's on-site generation, fine, that's understandable. But on-site generation is an infinitesimally small carbon cost compared to long-term savings through the design of the houses. You're talking about housing that's going to be there 100, 200 years. Yeah. We're only talking about a build time of, I don't know, what is it, 3 to 5 years. And I go back to the whole point that we said, passive house design is the gold standard. So going back to Gavin's comment about why we're building with bricks and mortar in this country is absolutely ludicrous. Wooden frames, passive house, prefabricated, far more sensible approach. What I think has stopped it in the past is it looks a bit funky, and previously we haven't been, the market hasn't been open to the idea of funky looking houses. That's why we get these horrible brick monstrosities with 2 Georgian columns out the front. Times have changed now. People will buy these things, and people will buy them at a premium. Sorry, I get very frustrated because I really passionately do believe that an aspiration, if nothing else, should be carbon neutrality as a minimum, carbon positivity as an aspiration. And you've said it yourself. You said you don't think that there's enough roof space. Well, have we actually looked at it? Have we done a study to say, can this be done?
Yeah, we have. We've done detailed modelling, and it won't be possible. And there's so many different definitions of zero carbon and net zero carbon as well. So we did look at some typical house types and looked at the amount of solar panels that we can accommodate on the roof.
If there's a technological reason why it can't be done, or a technical reason why it can't be obtained, then I'm very happy to accept that.
I don't think it's technical,
but I just feel that it's
design constraints. But I mean, from my own point of view, that's great to push for that. It was the brief we were given was to keep this commercially deliverable, put yourselves on a trajectory for meeting the government's aspiration of net zero by 2050.
My vote, I have to say, my vote on the standard would be passive house as a minimum. But anyway, that's over to you guys.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you. I feel like Councillor Mahaffey has actually done quite a lot of my work for me, so thank you. Absolutely agree with much of what he said. Nothing wrong with the presentation, just didn't go far enough. To help Paul out, the answer to the question I'm going to ask eventually is yes, you're right. So you don't have to worry anymore. I will just go on and ask the question. First of all, I think Councillor Mahaffey sort of hinted at it. This idea that there is not enough roof space, we know solar panels, south-facing roofs are really important. Good news is we haven't built a single roof yet. We can actually decide, we can make a decision that every single property will have a south-facing roof. And any large commercial property will have a dominant south-facing roof. There's no rule that roofs should be 50-50. But you are right to say, number one, insulation. Number one is do not use energy. Save energy, just do not use it. Number two is renewable energy. Number three is dirty energy. That's the order of priority. So if you build homes very well insulated, triple glazing, gold standard, wonderful thing. The challenge then is, how do you make that when you've got that pressure of how do you make houses affordable, and that equally we spend extra money to make them absolutely super gold standard environmental? And that is a real challenge, and we have to accept that. But where's the rule that says when you buy a house, you buy the insulation? Can't you buy the house but rent the insulation, rent the solar panel? Is there an opportunity for us to turn something that is an initial cost at the front of a project into a revenue stream for years to come, so that future generations will benefit? And in 20 years' time, when your solar panel's knackered or your insulation's not as good as the new insulation that's come out, you can replace it, and then you can charge more for it, and you can keep a long-term revenue stream, which is massively important for local authorities like us, where we have money in the bank, but we need to turn it into a revenue stream. So there's a real opportunity, and pension funds in exactly the same position. So actually we could sell houses, because I think it's right in terms of what Councillor McAfee, Councillor Tomlin said, people would pay a premium for a well-insulated solar panelled house. But of course, a lot of these are going to be social housing, they're going to be rented housing. How do you turn the rental, where housing benefit may be paying for it, etc., into you're getting a benefit of this, you're having cheaper electric? How do you turn that? And I mean, the government could do more for us, but I think we could actually turn that into when you move into this house, you are renting the solar panel that's providing you energy, you're renting the insulation that's reducing your energy costs. There has to be a way of turning this into a revenue stream, so that the upfront cost is absorbed and long-term pays for itself, and actually is an investment income for pension funds, etc. So no excuse. I will always mention, every time we talk about cars and sustainable travel, reducing the use of your car, massively important. That will not necessarily reduce the ownership of a car. I own a car, it's a big car, it's an ugly car, it did 1,000 miles last year. It won't do that next year, because I will get rid of it, because 0 to 60 will only be achieved if I drive it off a cliff. But it's a rubbish car. It's really inefficient fuel wise, but I don't use it, so it's fine. And so we've got to get away from this, or we'll have this. I mean, John Prescott. I mean, every village has an idiot. Every government has an idiot. John Prescott was the idiot that said, "Yes, I will get rid of cars." We will always own cars. We will hopefully drive them less. So can we make sure that in any of the design standard, we don't go with a silly Prescott idea of we won't own cars anymore because we'll use buses. We're going to own cars. We're going to do little at the weekend, even if we catch a bus to work every day. So please make sure you build parking spaces, and every single house we build in Manydown has at least one off-road parking space so they can charge it. And if it's more than 3-bedroom houses, 2 off-road parking spaces so they can charge it. And people have friends, and they will come round post-COVID, and they will want to park somewhere as well. But that's another issue that I keep banging on about. But I think we could have been more ambitious. I absolutely think Councillor Tomlin, Councillor Mahaffey are right in terms of this going for the 50% when we know in 2025 it's going to be 70%. We should be absolutely going further, faster. Basingstoke is not a follower. Basingstoke-on-Deane is a leader. What we've got to do is work out the solutions around the affordability and how we mix affordability of housing with the excessive cost of, or the extra cost of, sustainability. And we've got to be innovative and market leading and world leading in terms of, yeah, actually, do you know what? You can buy this house, but you're renting the insulation that you have in that house. You can rent that house, but you're also going to rent the solar panel on the house, because actually, ultimately, for you as a consumer, you're having a much lower electricity bill, but someone's got to pay for that solar panel on the roof, and it can't be us. And so I think there's a real opportunity for us to be really innovative and go beyond what exists already and think outside the box. And I think we can achieve a lot more than we're heading for. I think we've made a great start, but let's go much, much further, because I want other authorities to go, have you seen what Basingstoke-on-Deane have done? I don't want us to be a Basingstoke-on-Deane have done of what that council did, or very similar to what that council did. We're ahead of the game. People follow us. We don't follow others.
Yeah, that's great. I certainly think it'd be interesting to look at rental models. I mean, solar PV is very cheap now, but there's not the feed-in tariff. There's the smart export guarantee, which pays a very modest amount of electricity for what goes back to the grid, and we'd be looking to use as much of that electricity on sites. You did have a study done on district heating, community heating, and it didn't really seem, in many areas, you had the density of housing to really make that viable. I mean, it could work within flats, but even the future home standard, or the Manydown standard, will have very high insulation performance levels there. So again, when you have that and your space heating demand is so low, does it make sense to put community heating in as well? That's something that needs to be thought about. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. Sorry. Let's see. I see somebody else.
If it helps with a train of thought, the biggest building on any community is normally the school. The school is open all day when the sun is shining.
Yeah.
It tends to close at night when the sun is not shining.
Yeah.
There's an opportunity there, I think, in terms of your big solar panel and the community generation from some of those flats.
I think it's just, you know, PV is pretty inefficient. The technology is gradually, slowly improving. You need massive areas to do something useful. I mean, if you had a wind turbine, you know, near the development, like in Reading, perhaps that could start to make quite a considerable contribution, and could be a means of, you know, an investment opportunity with a return potentially there. But you know, it's just to assure you that the fabric standards with, I remember my point now, the fabric standards with the Manydown standard itself are very high. The absolutely key thing is making sure through the build process that it's done correctly, that you have really good continuity of insulation and air tightness. And unfortunately, mainstream housing practice has demonstrated that there is a gap there that needs to be addressed and narrowed. I gave that figure that it's not uncommon for a lot of new homes to be using 50% more energy in use than they were designed to. You know, passive house does help to overcome that a lot, I must say. But you know, it's looking at the model. Would that work with volume house builders on plot parcels of land that are perhaps 250 units to deliver each time? I think it's got to suit the delivery mechanism and the developers, and that's not quite so much something that I can comment on. I'm afraid.
We're the customer, the developer is not. So we ask what we get what we want because we're the landowner and we're the customer. And so the developer provides the service we want, and if not, we'll find a different developer. That's how capitalism works. So we are not in hock to the developers.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Simon Mahaffey, I think you had another question. If we could make it fairly brief, because we do need to wind up.
It will be very quick because it's a repeat of. I mean, first, I just want to go back to the carbon thing to say, Paul, we cannot use the statement passive house is the gold standard, but we're not going to use it in the same sentence. So that's my point. But my question is actually going back to my second question I asked you earlier about how we're going to control the defects. I don't think I've got an answer to that one.
Yeah, look, it's fair to say that we need to develop a policy to look at that, agree a zero defects policy with the developers and the processes and the clerk of works, how they will guarantee that and the checks. So I can't give you a detailed insight into that. When it's been attempted before, people say, look, zero defects just isn't possible. We can only strive as best as we possibly can to reduce the number. So yeah, need to look back at some of the earlier work that was done for the under the Egan agenda and the movement for innovation, looking at defects. I mean, one way supposedly to reduce defects is use more modern methods of construction. So it's a policy certainly needs to be developed on that. It's an aspiration at the moment, I would say.
Right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Chairman, sorry, forgive me. I think John Isaac's been trying to get in for quite some time.
Sorry, I couldn't see John. John, you wanted to come in?
Thank you. Yeah. This what we've been talking about tonight is huge in terms of changes to the way houses will be built in the future, and it's not simple. We've heard. And I expected this, the sort of commitment of councillors to the net zero carbon targets and so forth. And some very good ideas that have been come out, particularly Councillor James on sort of revenue generation and so forth. So the way I look at it is that what we heard from the consultant tonight was that there's lots of things that we could be doing that would make a huge difference to the way that the energy efficiency and the controllability of housing and the quality of housing compared to what is currently being built. But I do see it as journey that we have to make in order to get to more energy efficient, carbon neutral homes. It's not going to be something that can be done overnight. And I just, bit of context here is that this work has been commissioned by the councils of this consultancy. We said we were going to do that because we've said that it's important there is a Manydown standard that's applied in the future. I think it will be an evolving standard, as I've said, but we've got to remember that we've got to work with our partner, whatever Gavin James says. They're going to be 50% owners of this joint development vehicle. We're 25% owners, or that's how it will be. And we've got to bring along Hampshire County Council with us. They have a different target for achieving net carbon neutrality. So I'm saying to you that, yeah, we understand the objectives. The technology is changing very rapidly. Costs are changing, and all these things. It's all very exciting. We know what our shared objectives are, but I'm just seeking to inject into this some understanding of how we're going to have to work with others to get to the ultimate objectives on Manydown.
If I may quickly,
thank you.
I would be happy to work with some of your members more closely to look at this in more detail. We have got a lot of modelling there, and if you'd like to sort of look at comparing standards, the Manydown standard, Future Home Standard, AECB Silver, and Passive House, then happy to do that. It's extremely difficult to, without a presentation and showing some quite technical information, to start getting a feel of that. But if I'm instructed by the councils, I'm more happy to do that.
We thank you for the offer, and I'm sure that's something that the officers will investigate further.
Right, thank you very much to Paul for his report, and we really do need to move on. I have made a few notes again. That main thing seems to be concerned that we're aiming at a standard that's based on a 2023, whereas I think a lot of people feel we won't have any houses up by then, or possibly many houses, and we really ought to be aiming for the 2025 standard. I think that seems to be the main concern. Right, we do need to move on, and we have another presentation, and I'll get it right this time, from the MDV LLP, which is Richard Coppell. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, Chair. Good evening, Council.
Good evening.
Just by way of introduction, committee, I am the Group Development Director for Urban Civic. My responsibility spans all of our 7 active large-scale development sites, this being the latest member of our portfolio. So, we are certainly worth saying we are absolutely delighted that Manydown, Basingstoke forms part of our portfolio of projects, and we're moreover particularly delighted that we're no longer talking about procurement, because I remember the last time I came to the Oversight Committee, I think different members at that point, we were talking about the processes post-procurement, but we were still locked into negotiation at that point. So it is great that we have moved on from there, and we can now focus on the good stuff, which is actually moving this project to a site in delivery, rather than just an aspiration to do so. So it's great that we've now signed the joint venture agreements, and we have MDV up and running. In fact, we have the second meeting of MDV next week. So that's great progress. So we're really pleased to be in that position. You may, given the hour, be pleased to know I'm not going to bombard you with lots of slides tonight. My job tonight is simply to highlight the route map, so the direction of travel for the next 12 months, and what we need to do in order to get the current position into a place where we can actually start building. Next slide, please, Jess. Thank you. So the route map, you can see that the procurement process and the final tenders have faded out because that's history now. As part of that process, we did agree an interim business plan, which kind of saw us up into contractual close, which we've now done. Well, we've now agreed that interim business plan with the joint venture board, which takes us up into the position of start on site, let's say. We've obviously got, well, the council as applicant have secured the resolution to grant outline planning permission. Clearly for us, that's a big work stream for the next 12 months, is turning that resolution into a planning permission. So the next 12 months for us is really twofold. One is to work with your officers and secure that outline. In a sense, it is finalising the Section 106 agreement, which your officers have already pushed on with, but we're now picking up the reins on that and getting that across to a satisfactory conclusion as soon as possible. The interim business plan really is a series of work streams which takes the site from its current position to that start on site, which is where we want to get to. And what we'll be doing over the next 12 months is preparing what we're calling an overarching business plan and a more detailed business plan for the first phase, which actually sets out cost, revenues, what we're going to be doing, and agreeing at the joint venture what the plans are for when we put that first spade in the ground, hopefully at around 12 months' time. So I think there was a member earlier who was talking about 3 years for the first bricks to be laid. Certainly the aspiration would be that we would be on site in 12 months installing infrastructure and enabling, so the first roads and utilities, and probably 12 months thereafter, you will see the first house building. That's a very ambitious program, but that's certainly the one that is driving us at this point. Next slide, please, Jess. So what does the overarching business plan look like? This is a bit of a summary of it. There's obviously a lot more detail that goes behind that. I haven't got time tonight to take you through each element of this, but perhaps if I just pick out a few important ones, which I know that councillors will be interested to hear. I think the first one is engagement, so incorporating wider stakeholders. Engagement to urban and civic is a very important part of our business. We pride ourselves in engagement all the way through our developments. It's not a one-off process. We don't just see it is not just a pre-planning consultation. This is a process that we maintain all the way through the life of our developments. We are already, we've already started that process. We have a community development lead that is overseeing that process as part of the project team that we are developing for Manydown. And she is already working very closely with your Sarah Shepherd and Chris Pritchard in working up an engagement plan for this project. So that's something we've been working on actually since probably back in March, April, so before we were under contract. So it's something we take very seriously, and we will have permanent resources on the project that will be their sole job, is to continually engage with not just you as an authority, but all stakeholders and the local community. We have, it was interesting, we had a mention earlier on in the meeting this evening, mention of Winklebury. I think there was a resident from the community there. We are meeting the Winklebury Community Action Group for the first time next week, I believe. So you can see we are starting that process of engagement. That will take time to get momentum, but it will happen, and you will start seeing us more and more in and around Basingstoke, meeting your the locals and yourselves. touch on employment and skills. I know this is a theme that's very dear to your hearts. It is for us too. We as a business pride ourselves in ensuring that jobs and skills is high on the agenda on all of our projects. Again, we have people within our business that are specialists in this field. Thus far, we've had conversations with the LEP, and we've also met Basingstoke College. Again, bear in mind that we're only just 2 months into this project, so we are just picking up those relationships. But I want you to be rest assured that we treat jobs and skills as a huge priority for us, and you'll be hearing more about that as we move forward. The Manydown standard, probably don't want to go too much because there's an awful lot about the Manydown standard tonight. I just wanted to flag a couple of things. One is we were the author of the Manydown standard. It was the idea behind creating a standard for this project to set this project apart from other projects, not just in Basingstoke, but also in the region. So that idea of having a Manydown standard, that came from us during the bid process. So we are wedded to having a standard that drives quality, and that's true to all of our projects. I won't get dragged into a conversation around zero carbon and net zero carbon at the moment, but I just wanted to let you know that, and really echoing Councillor Isett's words around the journey, I think it is fair to say that we are on a journey and we're learning about how we can achieve our aspirations, because we share aspirations about getting reducing our carbon across our sites. So we share those aspirations. Just out of interest, we are on another one of our sites, an interesting pilot scheme that we're running there, which is only a small scheme of 40 units. They are modular construction, so they're constructed off-site. They're volumetric modular. They will have significantly better insulation. They have significantly better fenestration, so increased daylighting, increased airflow. And we are also looking at that parcel. We're going to be implementing that parcel on an electric only with air source heat pumps. So we are on that journey. We are learning about what works and what doesn't. I'd also say to one of your other councillors that they will be ever so slightly funky as well. So we want to drive quality in terms of the look and the feel of the housing product, how it's built, but also the sustainability agenda. We're a long way from having a perfect solution yet, but we're on that journey, as Councillor Isaac mentioned earlier. The only other point I would raise is we've touched on education. The phase 1 development briefs that you'll see as part and parcel of the planning process. Clearly, there's a whole layer of detail that needs to be layered on top of the outline consent once it is finally issued. We will be working up detailed development briefs for certain aspects of the project, and education forms part of that. Again, I wanted to reassure councillors that education is hugely important to us, and schools are always delivered front and centre of our projects. For us, it's not just about providing excellent buildings to provide an excellent education to serve the communities that we develop, but it's also having great civic buildings. So we like our education buildings to work very hard for the communities they serve, both from an educational point of view, but also from a civic pride perspective. So there's a lot of detailed work that's going on now. We are appointing all our teams, our consultant teams, and we're just getting cracking so that we can get to the point of agreeing the overarching business plan within 12 months, which will then put us in that position where we can start infrastructure in the site and actually starting to see some house building. The last thing I wanted to touch on, if I may, if I've still got time, is the country park. You can see that's a key strand of the work streams. It's a hugely important element, and I know members will be keen to understand the shape and the look and the feel of this country park. We are too. This slide really just represents what was in our bid and really sets out the key strands to, and really a series of questions around what will this space be and what function will it perform. At the moment, we're on the start of the journey on the country park, but rest assured we'll be back to talk to members of the council and other stakeholders to make sure that this is fully engaged on. This won't be developed and conceptualized in isolation. We will do that with the wider community. It's how we work. So you can have that assurance from me tonight. I think what I would say about the country park is that what we have found, and this won't come as a surprise to you, what we have found, and increasingly over the last 9 months, is the importance of open space to our new communities, not just the new communities, but the existing communities as well. But having access to green open space is absolutely critical in our minds to creating a happy and sustainable community. So for us, delivering the country park and delivering it early is right up on our agenda, and that's something we really want to achieve. But we won't do that in isolation. We will do that with you, and we look forward to engaging with you and others over the next few weeks and months. That was a very whistle-stop tour of the kind of direction of travel for the project. There's, I'll just reiterate, we have just picked it up now. The ink is dried on the joint venture agreements. We're now in a really strong position that we've picked up the baton and we're running with it hard. And we look forward to updating you on progress periodically as we go forward. At that point, Chair, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Richard. And we'll start with Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. Excellent presentation. Lots to be quite excited and pleased about. I think first of all, in the country park, it's more of a comment that we talk about the country park. I have every confidence that we will deliver a fantastic asset for the people of Manydown, the people of Basingstoke. What I do always wonder is when we deliver a great asset and then we look at that great asset and then we go, once the press release is over, we forget about it. I really hope there is a long-term management plan and agreement between the development company, Hampshire County Council, Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council, who is taking responsibility for maintaining this park, emptying the bins, cutting the grass, maintaining the trees, etc. Because otherwise we end up with a very quickly running down park. It's the longevity. It's not the development of a country park. That's the easy bit. It's how will this be managed for the next 100, 200, 300, 400 years? Who's responsible for that, etc., which I hope we get an answer to. Moving on to we talk about advanced works, design code, site-wide framework, and that really fascinates me. I'm really quite interested in that because years ago, people built, I live in a bit of Basingstoke that's quite fortunate to have the newest houses in the borough and also the oldest houses in the borough. And so when they built the oldest houses, they never imagined they would have broadband, gas, electric. And so we dig up the roads and we dig up the pavements and we put electric in and we put gas in and we dig it up again to put waterworks in, and then the sewage pipes aren't big enough, so we dig it up again and take the sewage pipes out. And then we have this patchwork quilt and the county council come along and they re-tarmac at the pavement because it's such a mess. And then the following week, Virgin Media say, oh, we're going fibre optic, and we dig it up again and we put more stuff in the ground. And we constantly do this because we don't future-proof it. So when we look at the county, that was obviously a mistake. I can't blame the Victorians because they didn't know broadband was coming. We still make the mistake again in the 60s. We made the mistake in the 70s. We still make the mistake now. It would be really nice if we were the first generation to go, do you know what, things change. And we're going to put utility trenches. And when we design the wider Manydown and these site-wide frameworks, that we reflect the fact that fibre optic will become something else at some point, hopefully airborne, so we don't have to worry about tarmac. And so we future-proof it, and we think in advance that, you know, water pipes may have to get wider, maybe narrower. I don't know. Who knows what's happening to gas and electric in the future? But let's think about that now and make sure we design things. I'd like to understand how much effort has gone into looking at things, the errors of the past and learning from them. I really don't want us to put a fantastic road and pavement network around Manydown and then dig it up 6 months later because someone's upgrading their whatever. You know, are we designing utility trenches? Are we talking to people like BT and like Virgin Media to say, well, look, actually, can you pay us some money now? Because it's going to save you a fortune in future if we put in utility trenches and you don't have to retrofit tarmac and then the county council come along and redo the tarmac as a patchwork quilt. Really interested to know how much future proofing has gone into our thoughts on this so far.
Chair, would you like me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first point, just on your longevity point, I mean, that's absolutely a key point for us too, because, you know, this is a project that is going to take many years. So we need the assets that we create on the site to be sustainable in the long term. So management and long-term management plans and having a strategy and a solution for that at the outset is going to be important. So that is very much one of our work streams for the next 12 months. So that's something that we will, as a joint venture, need to agree and work out, because I completely agree with you. All too often, the quality of a place can fall down because of the long-term management. So that's as key as making it look pretty on day one, if not more key. So I agree. But rest assured, that's on the agenda. In terms of utilities, we haven't done it yet because we've just started, but we are already starting to engage with utility providers. And one of the benefits of delivering Manydown the way you are doing it with us, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But I'm not selling anymore because we're already under contract, so I don't need to sell too hard. But the way we work in terms of our master developer delivery is very much to create a comprehensive, we look at it as the site as a whole rather than as a piecemeal base. If it was house builders delivering the site over 10, 15 years, it would be done on a piecemeal basis. So we will plan solutions for drainage, telecoms, all the uninteresting stuff that goes below ground, and we will have future proofing in mind. You know, we will need to look at road networks. Are they going to be there forever? What happens when they are taken away, when people aren't driving in 25, 30 years time? So all of that needs to be on the drawing board, and that's the benefit of having a master developer involved as opposed to a piecemeal house builder approach, because we will look at it holistically and in a comprehensive fashion.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? I can't see any hands up. No more questions. In that case, thank you very much, Richard. Very helpful, very informative. Thank you. No doubt we'll see you again before very long.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Beginning of this meeting, we had a report from Councillor John Isaac from Andrew Reynolds. Has anybody got any comments to them now or any questions on those reports? If you could make it fairly brief if you have. I'm sort of fairly aware of the time. No questions. In that case, we have got a project report from Andrew Reynolds, which we need to go into private session for. So I move for it. We do go into private session. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor David Leakes. Thank you very much. And I need to read this paragraph. That pursuant to section 100 brackets A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public are be excluded from the remainder of the meeting on the ground that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing it, and therefore that exempt information is likely to be disclosed as defined in the appropriate paragraphs 3 of Schedule 12A of the Act.